2021 was not the best year for movies. Not saying it was bad, there were plenty of films from that year that I really liked, and even some that I loved. As a whole though, the lineup of films just wasn't anything too special. Fortunately, there were only 3 movies I can say I outright hated with a burning passion and would rather eat dog turds than rewatch them. But on the flip side, there were only a select few movies I can say that I hold close to my heart and had a huge impact on me. Outside of those, the year had its share of bad movies and great movies, but it felt like a lot of stuff was leaning towards the middle. A decent chunk of that ranking video was dedicated to talking about 5s and 4s out of 10s, movies that I just didn't find myself enjoying all that much or having strong feelings towards. As a whole, I would say it was a pretty mixed bag of a year, with only a few true gems. But even with all the less than stellar movies I had to talk about back then, I still think that watching 50 movies to make that list was one of the best decisions I ever made. By experiencing that wide selection of films, I gained a decent sense of what would click with me and what wouldn't, what would be interesting to discuss, and what would be boring. In short, the biggest thing I learned from doing that video is that it's less about the films that come out and more so about where you look for them. So going into 2022, I searched for more stuff that I had a feeling I would love, and as a result, the year's selection had so many movies that I really got into. It's amazing how I learned a bit about myself through doing the 2021 ranking and discovered more great movies because of it. And even besides the ones I knew would be up my alley, 2022's lineup of big movies was way stronger than the ones from 2021. There were so many creative, engaging, and well-written films that I had a really good time with. Yeah, there were a lot of bad ones, there's no denying that, but most of the terrible ones here are not nearly as painful as some of the garbage I suffered through last year. So the bottom half of this list looks to be fairly serviceable, and once we make it to the top half, we're just gonna be going through banger after banger after banger after banger after banger. We truly have a great lineup lying ahead, filled with so many amazing works of art. Judging by the length of last year's video, we're going to be here for a while. So grab some snacks, pull up a chair, and sit back as I discuss the movies I saw from the year 2022.
Disappointment in the game of life!
I believe that there are several different types of bad movies. First, there are the lazy ones. The ones that are completely devoid of heart or passion, and you can't care about them because the people making them didn't care about them. I have suffered through many of those movies, believe me. But then there's another type of bad movie. There are movies that are just so unfathomably terrible in ways you've never seen. Movies that just fail so hard in every aspect, less so because they're lazy, but more so because the decisions they make are baffling. Why am I bringing all this stuff up? Well, it's because The King's Daughter is the exact type of movie that I just described. It is so unbelievably terrible in every single way imaginable. Like, this isn't a result of the filmmakers not trying, because even the laziest of people wouldn't be able to achieve levels of awfulness quite like this. While I was watching this film, I can't even say that I was bored. I was amazed. I was amazed that there was actually a group of human beings who got together and poured millions upon millions of dollars into making this movie and distributing it into theaters for everybody to witness. How? How did this get approved? How did they think this was a good idea? How did nobody notice the glaring issues with this movie? For example, there's, I don't know, everything! This has to be one of the most poorly written movies I have ever seen in my entire life. The first time I saw it, I had absolutely no idea what I was watching. Thankfully though, I watched the movie for a second time, and all the pieces came together, but in a bad way. Okay, so this movie is about King Louis XIV, who is scared he will be assassinated, so he starts a mission to find this magical mermaid who he hopes will give him immortality. But that's not the actual plot of the movie. Oh no, it's not. They get the mermaid instantly, 5 minutes into this 94-minute movie. The king isn't even the main focus of the movie. Instead, it's about Marie Joseph, this random girl who lives with a bunch of nuns. Then Marie Joseph is told that the king suddenly wants to see her for a reason that is never explained. Once she gets to the palace, the movie becomes a series of events that don't make sense and are barely held together by an overarching story. Nothing is built upon or explained. Random stuff just happens. Marie Joseph flirts with this other girl, but that goes absolutely nowhere. She also plays the cello for the king's orchestra, but that goes absolutely nowhere. The king takes an interest in Marie-Joseph and spends a lot of time with her, which actually does end up going somewhere, but we'll get to that later. Then the terrible CGI mermaid who was kidnapped calls Marie-Joseph, and it turns out they can communicate with each other. Why did the mermaid call her? Why are they able to understand each other? I don't know. It's just magic, I guess. The writers totally know what they're doing. Just roll with it. The mermaid and Marie become best friends after one short scene together, and then, even though it serves basically nothing to the story, we start focusing on the romance between Marie-Joseph and this captain guy. It's not compelling because I'm not invested in either of these characters, and I don't even know who one of them is. So after Marie-Joseph is magically healed by the mermaid because reasons, she goes to the king and is like, "Oh, please set the mermaid free," and the king lies and says, "Oh, I'm going to use the power of the sauce to heal everyone in France." I swear, this movie never stops adding in conflicts and characters it straight up does not need. You could cut half of this stuff out and then fill up that other half with things like, character development and, explanations of why this stuff is happening. And all of that stuff happens within the first 50 minutes of the movie. Don't even get me started on the remaining 40. So the king calls Marie-Joseph for a talk and is like, "Surprise! I am your father, and you are the princess of France, and I want you to marry this dude because our country is flat broke." The film acts like this is a gigantic surprise for both Marie-Joseph and the audience, but it might be the most poorly hidden twist I've ever seen. Why? Because narrator Julie Andrews already spoils it in the first 2 minutes of the movie.
For she was the king's daughter.
They act like this is some sort of huge reveal, but the audience and most of the characters already knew because we were literally told it.
William Hurt.
Oh, and also, this is just a small detail, you may not have noticed it, but the title of the movie is The King's Daughter. There's no reason for them to even keep it a secret. They could have just told Marie-Joseph that she was being brought to the king because she's the daughter. Oh, but no, that would actually make sense. We can't have that in this movie. Seriously, did they look at this script before they sent it out? Then the entire climax is so stupid and nonsensical, and it hurts my brain to even think about. But as if all this wasn't bad enough, the movie goes off the wall in the last 1 minute. Yeah, believe it or not, we're still not done talking here. So Marie-Joseph and the captain guy have gotten married or whatever, and they spend their time looking for Atlantis. Yeah, Atlantis, in this movie about King Louis XIV set in the 17th or 18th century. One terrible CGI mermaid I'm fine with, but Atlantis? Where is the sense of logic? How am I supposed to take anything with the smallest ounce of seriousness when the film chooses to have the least logical and most insane plot points? And then, yay, they find Atlantis and the mermaids, all while accompanied by a pop song from somebody we don't talk about. And oh yeah, there are pop songs in this movie set 300 years ago. This all makes perfect sense. It's so coherent. Best story ever. This movie is making me go insane. While I was watching this, I could feel my soul being sucked from my body, leaving me with no sense of sanity whatsoever. It takes a truly bad movie to pull that off. Congratulations. This is one of the most incompetent and incomprehensible things I've ever watched. It needs to be seen for you to believe how bad it is. How something like this managed to be deemed releasable will always be beyond me. I need to rest my voice now. Goodbye.
Chris Pine.
Pinocchio: A True Story is beyond awful. Everyone is already aware of the Pauly Shore elephant in the room and his hilariously bad voice performance. But I feel like I'm the only person who is daring enough to sit through the actual movie from beginning to end. I hate myself. This was extremely difficult to get through. Not only is Pauly Shore's performance bad, but Jon Heder is unbelievably obnoxious in this. And the two of them almost never shut the f up to the point where it's not even enjoyably bad anymore. Whenever these two are on screen, the movie is a listen to these idiots babble on without rubbing your ears against the cheese grater challenge. And whenever they're not on screen, it's just the most boring and lifeless thing imaginable. An actual piece of wood has more personality and charm than this feature film. They struggled to fill the runtime, so halfway through, Pinocchio and Horse Guy go on a journey to find this magical lady. Then once they find the magical lady, she does nothing and they just go back home. Don't you just love filler? There's also this villain who has an unintentionally terrifying design. He wants Pinocchio to perform in his circus so that while people are watching it, he can go to their houses and rob them. What a great plan. It totally makes more sense than just charging people money to watch your popular circus. Then there's a fire, and Pinocchio thankfully burns, but then he becomes a human, so in the end nobody learned anything and I wasted my time. Thanks a lot, Pauly Shore, I really appreciate it.
Until next time, John!
So after John Lasseter was rightfully kicked out of Disney, he went searching for another animation studio that he can dictate and use as a ploy to insult the studio he previously worked at. A lot like what Jeffrey Katzenberg did when he got kicked out of Disney. Lasseter eventually landed at Skydance Animation, and now we have luck. This movie sucks. It reeks of saltiness and egotism in practically every aspect. It is so apparent that this movie wants to be Pixar so badly. It follows the Pixar formula, building a magic world off of this belief that humans have, in this case that being good luck and bad luck. That could be neat, I guess, but this film just gets everything wrong in its attempts to copy another studio. The world building is done in the least interesting way possible. 80% of this movie's dialogue is just explaining stuff to the audience. It's all just a tedious exposition fest that takes away any intrigue this world may have had. And this is spread throughout the entire movie because the plot is just the generic characters go from place to find something plot. Every time the characters go somewhere in this luck world, something goes wrong at the last second and they have to go to this other place. Rinse and repeat 20 times. It's seriously repetitive and annoying, and it's so obviously an excuse just so they can show off this world to the audience. Pixar movies are able to execute their world building in a subtle manner that ties into the plot in a natural and interesting way. But this movie just goes on forever introducing new locations and functions of this world to the audience, none of which are interesting. I could at least forgive that if the story was compelling, but it's not. The entire second act is just the two main characters trying to get a penny. Yeah, that's the reason they keep frantically going from place to place. And it's not like they're looking for the most magical penny ever or something like that. No, it's just a normal penny. We are shown dozens of these pennies in this world. Surely there is just one lying around somewhere. You don't need to waste time with this generic and agonizingly repetitive adventure. Every character in this movie is either boring or not even a character. I couldn't name you a single character trait about Sam or Bob. Those are the two most generic names in existence. Could you not come up with anything else? Then in the last 15 minutes, they try to pull an Inside Out-esque message saying that bad luck is just as important as good luck. Okay, cool movie, but that makes no sense. Stepping in dog poop cannot be painted as a good thing. Bad luck isn't helpful and it isn't needed. Saying that the expression of both positive and negative emotions is a fantastic and logical message, but this is just straight up stupid. Even the animation here isn't anything special. I guess there's a little creativity here and the occasional cute visual gag, but the characters and their movements are just so stiff and off-looking. This cost $145 million to make. Where did that money go? I'm just rambling at this point. Luck sucks. It's boring, it's hollow, and its attempts to copy Pixar are just straight up pathetic. In fact, it'd probably be a better use of your time if you just go watch the super low budget Pixar knockoffs. At least those can be considered funny. This movie is just sad. It's a sad attempt by somebody who shouldn't be working in the animation industry trying to relive the glory days of when he was at the helm of the most renowned animation studio of all time. But I can't say he didn't deserve the failure of this awful movie. I seriously have no hope for the studio if they don't get rid of Lasseter because he's only going to taint their future projects. Just leave these people alone. Go work at WoW now for all I care.
Gravity, also known as Pauly.
So do you know that one Geico commercial? Not the Dora the Explorer one, the one where a group of teenagers hide behind a bunch of chainsaws and the Geico guy is like,
If you're in a horror movie, you make poor decisions. That's what you do.
The stupidity that this commercial is poking fun at is unfortunately something that's the driving force of a lot of movies. And Fall is one of those movies. I watched this one because it had a really cool poster and basically no other reason. It's so dumb. The inciting incident of this movie is that two girls willingly climb up a 2,000-foot radio tower and then proceed to get stuck up there. Yeah, you heard me right. They willingly did that. The reason being that this one girl lost her husband while climbing, so the other girl's like, oh, come on, climb this rickety death tower with me. It'll help your mental health. Quick question, why are you so stupid? There are other ways to grieve than putting yourself in a life-threatening scenario. I hate this girl so much. Not only is she the reason the two of them even go do something like this, but she also shakes the ladder when they are reaching the top to scare the other girl. Then the ladder breaks and they are stuck. She causes all of the problems. She's such an idiot. I hate her.
I actually really do hate you Hunter!
Oh wait, my bad. She also wants to climb the tower because she's an epic influencer. As a YouTuber, this actually kinda offends me. But yeah, once the two girls get stuck, the movie could not be blander. They constantly try to signal people on the ground and get help, but I can see every failure they cross coming from a mile away. They come to the conclusion that if they can get cell service, they can call for help. So they attach one of their phones to a rope and lower it down 50 feet in the hopes that they'll get a connection. You are on top of a 2,000-foot tower. 50 feet is not gonna make a difference. Whenever the movie is not focused on their attempts to get down, it's focused on uncompelling drama. The stupid girl reveals to the widow girl that she actually used to have sex with their dead husband. This is brought up once and then never again, so it serves basically nothing. Also, when we reach the final 20 minutes of the movie, there's a big twist that the stupid girl actually died at an earlier point in the movie and that the widow girl has just been hallucinating that she was there. I mean, that's the only part of the movie that I didn't see coming, so props there. Then widow girl shoves her phone into the corpse of stupid girl so she can drop the corpse to the ground and send out a message for help. Okay. I will give the movie that the directing is honestly pretty good. As somebody who's afraid of heights, this definitely strikes the fear in me that it was supposed to. The CGI isn't bad at all for the low budget, and there are a couple of cool shots here and there. But I think there's a difference between an effective thriller and a good thriller. Yeah, I can say this movie had moments of genuine tension, but that doesn't make it a good movie. This was garbage and it actively made me want to fall off a cliff, just like that girl in the climax of The King's Daughter. I'm deducting extra points for making me think of that movie.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Hotel Transylvania Transformania might actually be the most annoying film I watched this year. Seriously, this movie is an endless cesspool of hyperactive characters constantly spewing annoying jokes and mostly unfunny slapstick. The story is dull and uninteresting, Drac is really unlikable and is just learning the same lessons he previously learned. I hate Johnny and his stupid monster walk. There are a couple okay moments and the animation is still solid, but as a whole, this very much feels like a direct-to-video sequel. I mean, technically, it is a direct-to-streaming sequel, which is pretty much the modern-day equivalent. It's a shame that this movie is utter garbage, because I can still go back to the first Hotel Transylvania and enjoy its likable characters and fun premise. But now, a decade later, we are at the fourth entry, and all the charm is just completely gone. I don't know what else there is to say, it's crap.
I'm self-aware. Isn't it funny how self-aware I am?
With most high-profile movies that I don't like, I can at least understand the appeal. Underneath the stuff that prevents me from enjoying these movies, I can see why another person might like it. Just because I don't agree with the public consensus on every movie I watch, doesn't mean I'm always left clueless as to why that public consensus is the way it is. But, Chippendale Rescue Rangers? I don't get it. Why do people like this? It's terrible. Maybe not the worst thing ever, but I can't find anything here that elevates this trash to the status of being a good movie. For positives, I liked the scene where Chip and Dale talk about Chip's dog wife. That was pretty funny. I like the puppet guy, even though he's not in the movie that much. Chris Parnell shows up for 1 second, and yeah, that's pretty much it. This movie is just so empty and devoid of anything to enjoy that it's almost ridiculous. It's just the most played out mystery story ever, with the least interesting characters and dynamics ever. If it weren't for all the cameos, I guarantee you, this movie would not have garnered as much traction as it did. I'm not angry if your movie is filled to the brim with cameos of characters from other IPs, but when you do nothing interesting or clever with it, it just gets annoying. These cameos serve basically nothing, nor are they funny, and it gets to the point where they start filling in the blanks of sentences with names of popular characters. Oh, Peppa Pig has gone missing. Ha ha, I hope we don't get attacked by the Rugrats. And here's Ugly Sonic, who is actually a somewhat important character because he shows up at the end in a helicopter. This is so hilarious, it deserves an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. Again, I'd be fine with cameos and references if they were used in a smart way, but this movie throws them at you as a crappy substitute for jokes. To give credit, it's not as annoying as, say, The Simpsons and Plusiversary or The Emoji Movie, but being better than those is not an accomplishment. On top of that, the main duo in this movie are just not enjoyable in the slightest. Chip has basically no personality whatsoever, and Dale is really annoying and the CGI is kinda uncanny. Then there's the putty chief of police, who turns out to be evil by the end of the movie. But they are so obnoxious about this twist. OMG, Putty's office smells like the cologne of the kidnapped guy. Putty must be evil. Oh no, that's too obvious. It's gotta be the other girl. And then it's revealed that Putty was evil all along. You are not clever, movie, you are dumb. I like meta humor when done well, but that and references are the only two jokes this movie has to offer. It's really tiresome. This movie sucks. It's perfectly fine to like it, but for me personally, I just can't see the appeal to this thing no matter which way I look at it. It's obnoxious, it's stupid, it's not clever or funny. I can't stand this piece of trash. We are only 6 movies in, and this list is already harder than I thought it would be. The movies are so bad, please make it stop. How many more terrible movies do we have left?
It's Morbin time.
Morbius is a very bad movie. I don't know what else to say about it. It's been endlessly mocked and memed on for the past 9 months to the point where the Wikipedia page makes note of that. And when you watch the actual movie, it's incredibly easy to see why. It's just awful. This is the most generic supervillain origin movie ever made, topped off with not great effects and production values. There are admittedly a couple neat ideas here and there, and the middle chunk of this movie wasn't too bad, I guess. I can definitely see why you would want to give this character his own movie. It's a decently interesting origin story on paper, and in another dimension, it probably would have translated into a good movie. However, we do not live in that dimension. We live in the dimension that has Jared Leto Morbius doing nothing interesting for the majority of the runtime and occasionally eating some people. You know how comic book movies are usually supposed to have this thing called stakes? Well, this movie's stakes feel non-existent because the plot is structured in such a weird way, and the only threat is the absolute joke of a villain that is Milo Morber or whatever his name is. Probably the worst villain I have ever seen in a comic book movie. The two of them fight like twice, and I just don't care. When the only threat in your movie is this guy, there is no tension whatsoever. Every other character and plot point is so bland that I instantly forgot about them the second the movie was over, and I'm not wasting my time rewatching it because, can you blame me? Morbius is a garbage movie, but you didn't need me to tell you that. The nicest thing I can say here is that I suppose it was better than the Amazing Spider-Man duology, so make of that what you will.
I'm lost.
I want to talk about a certain movie that came out on March 25th, 2022. It's not the worst movie ever, but it is one that I find very overrated. And that movie is The Lost City. I guess I can give this movie a small bit of credit and say that it wasn't quite as bad as I thought it would be. But I thought this movie was going to be abysmal when I went into it, so that's not really saying much. I sure do have a lot of problems with this thing, the biggest of which being that it's not funny. I chuckled like 3 or 4 times throughout this 112-minute movie. That's not a good chuckle per minute ratio, let alone a laugh per minute ratio. This really just is not my type of comedy, and the movie does nothing clever or surprising with its jokes. They are exactly what you'd expect. So many of them just get stretched out super thin, with gags that aren't even funny continuing on for over a minute. Har har, Channing Tatum has leeches sucking blood from his butt and Sandra Bullock has to pick them off. This goes on for some time. The movie is completely chock full of stuff like that, and it gets more and more funny as it goes along. To be honest, I didn't actually think the movie was that bad for the first 15 minutes or so. I enjoyed the way they set up Sandra Bullock's character as a struggling writer, and I was at least moderately interested in how the movie would build off of that. But no, we can't have an interesting movie. Let's go to the jungle where she and Channing Tatum will embark on an unenjoyable and generic adventure. I was really worried this was going to turn into another Jungle Cruise, but thankfully it wasn't. It was another chaos walking. Just 2 celebrities with no chemistry walking through the woods for nearly 2 hours and not many points of interest. I usually like both Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum fine, but they didn't work for me at all here, and their dynamic wasn't entertaining, nor was their romance compelling. I mean, Sandra Bullock's character wasn't that bad, but the Channing Tatum guy is just so stupid in this. He constantly screws up and causes problems because he's dumb, and that's just not the type of character this guy is meant to play. During the aforementioned leech scene where they show his buttocks, I actually felt embarrassed to be sitting in that theater. And oh yeah, I saw this movie in theaters.
On opening day.
Not only was the movie really bad, but the Sierra Mist I got at the concessions was just way too sour. What's the deal there, Sierra Mist? Why did you find the sourest lemon on the planet and put it into my drink? I declare war on Sierra Mist. We should all drink Sprite. Wait, What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, The Lost City. The climax wasn't exciting or tense because it felt oddly short. The Daniel Radcliffe villain and his plan are just completely ridiculous. He kidnaps Sandra Bullock and brings her to the jungle because he wants her to translate this ancient text. But then she translates the ancient text and it says basically nothing, making the inciting incident of this movie's entire plot completely pointless. At least Brad Pitt showed up and is shown to be the strongest dude ever, but then he's out of the movie entirely after like 5 minutes and we're stuck with these two instead. Yeah, that's everything I have to say. Lost City sucks, moving on.
Gay!
Bros was a movie I was actually very optimistic about. In an age where companies like Disney are too scared to release anything with significant queer representation on the big screen, it's great to see a major studio promote and release a full-on gay rom-com between two guys. Or I guess in this case, two bros. And on top of that, it just seemed like a simple and sweet movie that I would really like. But no, it's bad. This movie really drags on and almost entirely fails to endear me to its characters. There's nothing inherently wrong with this movie's plot, but what destroys the entire thing is the comedy. It's so unfunny to the point where even Lost City was a legitimately funnier movie than this. Pretty much the only joke they are interested in telling is along the lines of, "Lol, gay people, we're so funny, everything is gay, straight people suck, ha ha ha." I'm not saying any of this stuff is harmful or offensive. Keep in mind, I myself am not straight, and I have no problem with a movie cracking jokes like that. It can be funny when done well. But Bros just does it so often, 10 times per minute even. Some of these jokes might be funny on paper, but when they come one after the other for over an hour, it's so annoying. It's like the movie is so proud of the fact that it's a film for a queer audience that it constantly rubs it in your face to the point where it even feels a little pretentious. Even if you can ignore all those jokes, this movie really isn't anything special. It doesn't do anything interesting with the main romance, and most of the scenes they share just sort of blend together. There are a couple cute interactions and sweet moments, but everything else the two go through just feels generic and hollow. At one point, Billy Eichner's character is meeting with the other guy's parents, and the other guy's like, "Hey, can you not talk about gay stuff for a while?" Then Billy Eichner's character proceeds to rant about gay stuff all throughout dinner, and afterwards the other guy rightfully gets angry at him, and Billy Eichner is like, "You're trying to change me? Is it because I'm gay?" Am I seriously supposed to be siding with this guy? He's annoying, not because he's gay, but because he never shuts up and is responsible for 95% of the unfunny jokes in this movie. Ugh. It's kinda a shame that this was as irritating as it was, because there are glimpses of something good in here. When the movie is not cracking gay jokes, it can get some chuckles sometimes, and like I said, the romance had its moments. The last 10 minutes especially were really touching and wholesome. If this movie had seriously toned down on those gay jokes and just focused on tender moments like this, I probably would have really enjoyed it. But you just had to see how many uses of the word gay you can shove into a single script, didn't you? It's not like I don't want queer rom-coms in theaters. I would love to see more of them. I just want good queer rom-coms in theaters, something that Bros sadly is not.
Who do you think invented the Minions? Look what happens when you slow it down.
Never in a million years would I thought I would be saying this, but I might have been too mean to Minions: The Rise of Gru. I was merciless when talking about this movie in my review, and I originally thought it would end up way lower on this list. But a few months after seeing it, I looked back and compared it to all the other terrible competition it was up against, and I came to realize that this movie is a step above those other ones. Especially when comparing it to Transylvania, which is also an unnecessary sequel to an animated franchise that has long passed its prime. I mean, Minions has a few things I can say I genuinely enjoyed, even putting aside the good animation. I liked the plane scene, the opening credits, and the kung fu montage. There were moments where I can say I was having a pretty good time, which is more than I can say for the previously mentioned movies. Plus, this one is way shorter, and it's over before you know it. With all that said, not much else about my opinion has really changed. This movie is unbelievably hyperactive and exhausting. It's always moving at a fast pace and doesn't give me enough time to get invested in anything. Characters are constantly screaming at the top of their lungs and doing random shenanigans, which most of the time aren't enjoyable. It's annoying, it's tiresome, it's loud. Good lord, this movie is loud. I still don't like all the fan servicey moments the movie is shoving in your face, and I wish the movie could have explored Gru's character more rather than just having him hang out with this other villain. I also hate everything to do with Otto. I would still call this a bad movie and not worthy of its Letterboxd rating or its $900 million box office. There are so many better films than this one, but looking back, back, there are also so many worse ones. And I'd be lying if I said there wasn't anything to enjoy here. I hope Illumination will pick themselves up in the future, and they are showing signs of that with what we've seen from the Mario movie. But even if that movie is good, I don't think this studio will be able to change the direction unless they put this franchise behind them.
No!
She's gone astray, so far away from her father's
Dragon!
For some reason, I've never talked about this movie before, but I really love Wolfwalkers. It's a gorgeously animated and incredibly moving tale that really grabbed me. Not only is the world building insanely captivating, but every one of the characters is likable and compelling. I count Violet Evergarden the movie as a 2021 film, so this is easily my favorite movie of 2020, and definitely in my top 10 for this decade so far. Naturally, after watching that work of art, I was more than excited to see the next film from the studio that made it, Cartoon Saloon. This studio seems to be praised among animation fans, and has delivered a consistently solid lineup since 2009. So My Father's Dragon had a lot to live up to, especially coming off the heels of Wolfwalkers. I began watching the movie, and the first 15 minutes with this kid and his mother moving into the big city were decently charming, but nothing was really sucking me in like the past works of the studio. Then the main kid runs off and meets this talking cat, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is where the movie will start to get good. Then he travels to this magical island to find a dragon. Alright, surely it'll get good now. Then the kid has to free the dragon despite the animals on the island wanting to keep the dragon tied up. Oh man, this is gonna be the point where the movie becomes great. Then he actually does manage to free it, and the second that the dragon opens his mouth, I immediately was like, this is hopeless, it's never gonna get good. Boris the dragon is legitimately the most annoying and stupid creature in existence. He never shuts his mouth and is unbearable to watch. You think Sisu is bad? Ho ho ho, trust me, you ain't seen nothing yet. I actually cannot describe to you how much I hate this character. His voice is insanely irritating, and he is not once funny. I sure do hope you love loud screaming as well as butt and fart jokes. Seriously, are we sure this is the same studio that made Wolfwalkers? I almost warmed up to him towards the ending, but then he does something stupid and he ruins everything and the movie has to continue for 20 more minutes. Oh, and by the way, have I mentioned that I hate Boris? Putting that aside, this film is just really generic and lame. It feels like a much worse version of something like Where the Wild Things Are, with less interesting characters and barely any of the charm. The kid and Boris have to save the island from sinking, which could be exciting, but they just spend the film meandering around, all while meeting characters and facing obstacles which are just so dull. There are a bunch of moments that are supposed to be emotional, but they miss their mark because the main character isn't that interesting, and Boris is an annoying piece of shit. I can't get invested in these characters, so I can't really care about the journey that they're going on either. It's all just so dumbed down and basic that it really feels like this movie was made specifically for children under 10. And I certainly have no problem with movies being made for younger audiences. As long as the story and characters are solid, then it's a good movie regardless of the demographic. My Father's Dragon, on the other hand, is just annoying and bland, so I can't say I enjoyed this at all. On the plus side though, it's not a soulless movie. There was clearly a lot of heart put into it. The emotional moments at the beginning and ending actually work, and there are a few sparks of charm hidden here and there. Also, the animation style is really gorgeous, giving off the aesthetic and feel of a children's book perfectly. But as a whole, this movie kind of sucked. The gap in quality between this and the other Cartoon Saloon movies is just astounding. It could have been a perfectly pleasant and sweet little movie, but Boris just destroyed everything.
Repressing the crush made it stronger, which feels good.
High school movies tend to be very hit or miss with me. Sometimes I can get something really funny and emotional. Other times I end up with something that feels like it belongs on Disney Channel. Or even worse than that, something like Dear Evan Hansen. And I really hate to say this, but Crush is definitely leaning towards the latter category. Nothing about the movie is bad, but it really is just the most plain high school movie you can imagine. Absolutely nothing about the directing stands out, except for like this one cool time-lapse transition. It really has no flair whatsoever, or anything to make it stick out from the rest of its genre. A movie like Everybody's Talking About Jamie is also pretty generic on paper, but at least it had great songs that were presented in a fun manner, and I actually cared about the characters to the point where it didn't matter that the movie was kind of simple. This one really doesn't do anything creative with its presentation, nor does it have any plot lines or characters that haven't been seen before. Although, like Jamie, it does get me invested in the main characters just enough to keep the film away from being boring. The two main girls have some sweet chemistry, and I enjoy watching them hang out together. The relationship is really well done. Plus, this movie has gay jokes, and unlike in Bros, they are used sparingly and can be a little funny.
You guys are so straight, it's almost gay.
Yeah, I wouldn't call this movie awful by any means. It's just an incredibly by the numbers and standard teen flick. They couldn't even come up with a better title or poster for this.
You'll find this trace
I was so close. I was this close to getting through the entire selection without another Dune situation. I had watched 47 out of the 50 movies, and there was no movie that I can point to and say, this is a movie that is praised to an insane degree by everybody, which I straight up do not like. I was so close to completing the list without something that would make film lovers despise me. But then the time came to watch the 48th movie, and alas, I didn't think After Sun was that great. This might just be the most disappointing movie of the year for me. The amount of acclaim I saw it getting was huge, and reading up on what the film was about, it seemed like the type of movie that can strike an emotional punch. The pieces for that punch are in here, but not only do they fail to come together, but some of them just get drowned out by the movie's execution. I obviously knew this wasn't going to be a film driven by the plot, but I at least expected it to have some sort of build-up and payoff of something, and it kinda doesn't. The entire thing is just random vignettes about this guy and his daughter going on vacation together. Actually, no, they're not even vignettes, because that implies they're mini stories. These are really just scenes of characters doing random things, all of which are over in a minute or two. Sometimes it can be cute and charming, like when they throw food at the performers who are doing the Macarena. More often than not, though, the scenes just sort of come and go, not lasting long enough to leave a real impact. Or even worse than that, scenes where literally nothing is happening, lasting for minutes on end and adding in nothing. It's fine to have a movie that is just a bunch of random events mushed together, but this movie really doesn't offer enough to keep me invested throughout the entire runtime. I wouldn't say the main two characters are uninteresting, they're just sort of fine with nothing really to latch onto for either of them. I can see where they're trying to go with their relationship at points, and like I said, there are a couple touching moments, but overall, I think what ultimately made this movie fall apart for me is the structure of everything. Like, there's a scene towards the ending where we cut to the daughter character all grown up. That could be really interesting considering we already got to know her as a child. But that scene lasts for a whopping 1 minute and the movie doesn't do anything with it. A focus on both the perspectives of adult Sophie and kid Sophie could have strengthened the core of the movie, maybe something along the lines of Only Yesterday. And I didn't love Only Yesterday either, but at least that movie's structure helped it build up to an ending that actually resonated. This movie is trying to do that, but it really falls short and doesn't make me feel much by the ending. I don't know, I wanted to love this film, but the way it went about showing the relationship between Sophie and her dad really dragged down the experience. Not bad, but not something I was crazy about. Apologies.
Space. It's so huge. I mean, like, it's really fucking huge. You won't believe it.
Hey, does anybody remember Lightyear? I kinda don't. I thought this movie was decent when I first saw it, but when it immediately left my brain a week afterwards, I knew I probably gave this movie more credit than it deserved. Not because it's bad, but because it's just basically nothing. This might be the most empty Pixar movie that has ever been released because it doesn't do anything memorable or unique. The jokes don't stand out, the messages don't stand out, the animation doesn't stick out, the characters really don't stand out. The only interesting discussion point here is the Zurg twist, but if you've seen the movie, you'd know that's not a compliment. I can't say I hated it, I still think the first 30 minutes are really emotionally strong, and if they continued on that path, I would have appreciated this a lot more. But instead, we got a cliched story with not much to offer in terms of its humor or characters. In a year where we got so many amazing animated movies with unique styles and thought-provoking themes, it really sucks to see Pixar come out with something as uninspired and flat as Lightyear. And I think this movie's non-existent impact in box office returns serve to prove that brand extension can only get you so far. Moral of the story is that Lightyear isn't really worth your time, so give it to these movies instead. That is all.
Yep, so now Dad only sees Grandpa in 15-minute intervals.
It's like speed dating, but with your dad.
I briefly touched upon Strange World in my Disney animation video, where I mentioned that the movie was just sort of average, on top of bringing up the problems I had with both it and those other 3 movies. Weirdly enough, I think the experience of making that video made me appreciate Raya and the Last Dragon more, while making me appreciate this film slightly less. It's better than Lightyear because it's a little more creative, and I can see some passion in here, but that's all buried underneath such a rushed narrative and banal adventure. Like I said in the other video, this movie just rushes into everything, giving no time for any of it to actually sink in or get me interested enough in this world or these characters. I mean, these characters are decent, I enjoy some of their interactions, and I especially love Jake Gyllenhaal's vocal performance, but nothing here really gave me a strong reason to care about them. There's just so much missed potential here, and I think if Disney gave this movie more production time, it could have been unique and fun. But everything involving the characters, and especially the strange world itself, ends up really underdeveloped. We don't get to explore this world enough or the creatures that inhabit it. The characters just walk around and that's it. The ending lion turtle twist is cool, but the movie doesn't do enough to build up to that or even make me care that much after it's revealed. At least Raya and the Last Dragon took its time setting up the world and tied the movie's plot into it, even if said plot needed more work. Another aspect of this movie that was really undercooked was its overall direction. It's clear that the film wants to pay homage to classic adventure films and even comic books. We get shreds of that with these old-timey transition or the opening scene. I would have loved to see Disney tackle a film like that, but we don't get to see nearly enough of those elements, and the end result is just a basic modern animated movie. The adventure isn't all that exciting, and I feel like the movie is too preoccupied with shoving the generational trauma message in our faces to really add in a feeling of tension that this movie needed. Constantly, it's just the three Clades arguing with each other. All their scenes just blend together, and it gets so repetitious to the point where I was no longer invested. I also hate Jaeger Clade, and this movie did nothing to make me like him.
Oh, I am the awesome explorer known as Jaeger Clade. I must go over the mountains. I don't give a shit about me own son. Bye.
Then, 25 years later, when Jaeger meets up with the main characters and joins them on the adventure, his end goal is still to get to the other side of the mountains. This leads to the oh-so-great poopy trope where he leaves and then comes back after 2 minutes. Wow, what a great father.
The only thing he cares about is himself and conquering those mountains.
The movie has a couple parts I enjoyed, like the funny closet scene and some okay action bits, but otherwise, this movie was just kind of eh. Not the worst movie from the studio in recent years, but kind of emblematic of all the problems that have been weakening their quality. I hope Wish will be a good return to form, but I'm not quite sold yet. Oh well, at least the dog was cute. While I am most certainly not the biggest fan of it, I will say this about Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. It is not the worst movie I've watched for the purpose of a deal, like, no way. But yeah, I kinda expected to get more out of this movie. Even if I'm not the biggest fan of horror, I was interested in this movie's premise, and if it could get me invested in the characters, then I would probably have a good time with it. However, that's where the movie really fell short for me, the characters. I didn't particularly care for any of them, really, because the movie does a really bad job setting up the story and giving us reasons to be interested in these guys. I guess I was a little captivated by the main girl and her relationship with their girlfriend, but that faded away after about 10 minutes because then it dissolved into this bland, tepid teen horror movie. It doesn't feel like there's a creative sense of humor or unique direction the movie is trying to take. It's so much more stale than I was expecting. I mean, this is A24 we're talking about. But Bodies, Bodies, Bodies just doesn't do too much to stand out from other movies of its type. If you told me that Blumhouse made this movie, I would probably believe you. Yeah, it's supposed to be a critique on Gen Z or whatever, but the movie doesn't focus on that nearly enough, nor does it add anything to the story. I mean, it adds nothing aside from one twist, but we'll get back to that. The film does get slightly more engaging after the game of Bodies times 3 starts, and you do feel a rising tension as the film goes on. I found it easier to stay invested in the story once the cast dwindled down to only 3 or 4 people, and I liked how the movie tried to blend together aspects of mystery and horror. The final act is mostly really strong, to be honest, with a general feeling of high stakes, and I once again got invested in the main girl's relationship. It almost made up for the nothingness of the first 2 acts, but then the movie does something really stupid. In the last, I kid you not, 2 minutes of the film, it's revealed that Pete Davidson accidentally killed himself while filming a TikTok video, which is what caused the others to think there was a murderer amongst them. And that's what caused them to spend the entire film going around killing each other until they found out who it was. But nope, it was all for nothing because haha, TikTok is stupid. I mean, I agree with that, but really? It's such an anticlimactic ending that was not built up to at all and feels more like it would have come from the how it should have ended video of this movie. I'm sorry, I wish I could have gotten into this one, but it's a really, really forgettable experience that left no impact on me. Possibly A24's weakest offering this year, but hey, if this is the worst they've got in store, then they must have some damn good movies coming up.
Who is he? Doctor Strange?
You know, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is one of the most overhated movies of the year. While the general reception appears to be positive, I cannot tell you just how much I have seen this movie dragged through the mud since it was released. That applies to a lot of Phase 4 Marvel stuff, but with this movie especially, the people who hate it really hate it. With me, however, I don't really see an abomination here. Maybe it's because I watched this in quick succession with Morbius, which made Strange seem like the best movie ever in comparison, but I still think this is a solid movie that doesn't warrant the hate it has received. And by that, I mean it's like a 6 out of 10 because it's still not all that great. I guarantee I'm not the first one to go on about this, but this movie really reeks of missed potential. The MCU has always played around with the concept of different universes in stick, but here we have a movie literally subtitled In the Multiverse of Madness. Yet in the actual movie, it doesn't feel like they take advantage of this at all. I would have loved a movie about Doctor Strange going on some epic quest throughout the different worlds in the multiverse. That could have been awesome. But instead, the main characters spend most of the movie in this one dimension, which is cool to explore at first, but as time went on, I really just wanted them to go someplace else. The stuff that happens in here is still fine and enjoyable enough. I like Strange's interactions with America, and even within this one dimension, there are a ton of great ideas. That's kinda another issue though. The film brings up so many cool ideas, but they just aren't utilized that well. The Illuminati Council, or whatever it's called, is pretty neat, but they just show up for a couple minutes and then just sort of die. Okay, bye. Wanda works great as a villain conceptually, but I wish they had gone all the way and made her a flat-out maniac rather than desperately trying to make her sympathetic. Instead of being actually defeated, she turns good at the last second and then just sort of dies. Okay, bye. The final battle in this movie isn't even between Strange and Wanda. Instead, Strange goes to this snowy dimension and fights himself for a reason I forget. Christine is also here because I guess Strange can't get over his ex, even though they wrap things up pretty well in the last movie. The music fight is still cool though, and the other action scenes are solid as well. But I kinda wish we got a couple more of them. I also wish the movie was more focused, I wish some of the characters had more development, I wish we got to explore the multiverse more. This is definitely a film where its parts are way better than its whole, but the whole isn't anything terrible either, I guess. Also, who is this green bull? Did I miss something? How long has he been here?
Oh man, this stinks more than that time I was in that new Sonic game.
My experience of watching Sonic the Hedgehog 2 the first time around might have soured my opinion a little bit. On the day that I went to the theater, I was supposed to go and watch this little obscure movie called Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. But the old lady who was checking tickets outside the auditorium wouldn't let me in despite the fact that I had already purchased the ticket. And I couldn't just sit there and do nothing, so I went to go see Sonic 2 instead, and I was not very kind to it. I mean, how could you not be pissed when you plan on watching an absolute masterpiece and instead get stuck with Sonic making pop culture references and Jim Carrey flossing? I rewatched the movie for this video though, and I did warm up to it a little. This movie has a lot of really strong stuff that could make it a pretty fun watch at times. Jim Carrey is obviously great, even better than he was in the first movie. Now that we've gotten past normal Robotnik, it's cool to see the insane version of the character, and his performance is absolutely golden. Honestly, the opening scene with him was probably my favorite part of the movie. In fact, I'd say the first half of the film is pretty solid in general. There's some bad and cringeworthy jokes here and there, but I do really enjoy the relationship between Tails and Sonic. It's really sweet stuff, and this compliment continues to the end of the movie as well. Plus, a lot of the action scenes are really exciting and fun. However, after Tails and Sonic escape the avalanche, the movie kinda loses me. The focus actually drifts away from Sonic, and now it's on Tom's wife's sister's wedding being revealed to be a ploy by the military or something like that because they wanted to capture Sonic. That's stupid. The increase in focus on the humans during this part was really jarring, like I don't want another Tom and Jerry, okay? My investment dropped after that point, even once the movie went back to focusing on Sonic. And that's not good considering it happened an hour into this 2-hour movie. There's so much stuff here that could have been cut out or at least trimmed down because the end result comes out really jumbled. They should have combined the two climaxes together, cut out the wedding stuff entirely, and this stuff with Robotnik's bagel shop or whatever. I mean, there are 2 scenes in this dedicated entirely to Wade, a pointless side character from the first movie who I forgot existed and doesn't add much here either. At least he's played by Adam Pally, who also voices Brock in the epicness of Crossing Swords. If you look at the entire thing, this movie is not well put together, and the humor is more of a mixed bag, so that wasn't able to save it either. There's a fun time to be had here, and I like what the filmmakers are doing, but having them do it for 2 hours straight, I don't know if that really worked for me. A decent enough popcorn flick, just not one I'm eager to see again.
Get out of here, you putrid poultry!
Chicken Hair and the Hamster of Darkness is actually not that bad. I'm as confused as you are right now. I pretty much only watched this movie as an ironic joke, not really expecting anything from it. But in a strange twist, the movie was genuinely funny and it was able to hold my attention the whole way through. If there were ever a tier list of cheap, low-brow, direct-to-streaming animated kids movies, this would be a solid A tier. Of course, that's not really saying much, but hey, I'll take what I can get. This film was made by N-Wave Pictures, who are another notorious animation studio in the same vein as Splash Entertainment. Among this not exactly high-quality catalog, Chicken Hair really sticks out because it feels like the people who made it actually wanted to make a good movie. They didn't really succeed, but they got fairly close, I'd say. Chicken Hair himself is a pretty likable and sincere protagonist. Both he and his arc are extremely generic, but I actually cared a little bit about his struggle to accept who he is. I like this skunk character who joins Chicken Hair on the journey, and there are plenty of fun set pieces. The adventure is actually kinda engaging, and the jokes aren't too bad either. Nothing here is really hilarious, but I got a few chuckles. I liked to the point in the movie when the crew got kidnapped by Minecraft piglets. The animation and action scenes with those little guys are really fun to watch. In fact, the animation for the most part here is fine. However, for every character that I enjoyed, there was one I wasn't crazy about. The villain is really lame, and this turtle who sounds like Steve Buscemi is trying way too hard to be sarcastic and funny, which gets annoying by the final act. He does end up weighing down the movie by a lot because he serves basically nothing to the story and could have been axed. Also, the climax is kinda rushed and not exciting because the villain sucks. And there is that overall generic kids movie vibe that the movie is never able to shake off and form its own identity. Still though, I was pleasantly surprised at how much I didn't mind this. Not amazing or even all that good, but a solid time for what it is.
They don't hit the Pentagon!
Turning Red is a little tough for me to talk about. Like, by no means would I call this a bad movie, it's not even mediocre. It just doesn't quite click with me in the way that I would have wanted it to. I can see what this movie is trying to do, and with a bit of tweaking, it could have been really great. But with the overall direction, it kinda falls apart. Not gonna lie, part of the reason I've neglected to review this is because I wouldn't be able to keep myself from comparing it to Luca, and given how I feel about Luca, that would be a little mean to do to Turning Red. But looking back, I really think that Turning Red struggles to accomplish what it's trying to accomplish in ways that Luca just doesn't. Both of these are more character-driven slice-of-life films with main characters having simple goals, all with a bit of supernatural stuff thrown in. But whereas Luca inserts its emotions very naturally into the story, Turning Red always feels the need to amp everything up to 11 just to make the audience feel something. We want to show the audience that the mom is overprotective? Okay, let's have her drag her daughter down to the convenience store to yell at this dude after seeing a drawing of him, causing a big scene and embarrassing her daughter in the process. We want to show the audience what May is like? Okay, let's have her talk to the audience and go on and on about how awesome and quirky she is in the opening scene. And also twerking, wow, that's so hilarious! It's just really annoying and unnatural. Not in the sense that the movie is trying too hard to shove stuff down your throat, but in the sense that everything is so exaggerated that it becomes harder to get invested in the story or the characters. Being over the top isn't always a bad thing, but in what's mostly a slice of life story that's trying to rely on the audience connecting with the characters, it doesn't really work. I could be biased since I am a Ghibli fan after all, but more often than not, I think it's better for a character-driven film to be calm, natural, and slow, rather than hyper, loud, and over-dramatized. Although, I can see that Turning Red doesn't really want to be the same type of movie that Luca was, and the direction the movie actually has is fairly enjoyable. After the first 15 minutes, I warmed up to May a lot, and she becomes far more likable. I loved her relationship with her friends, and whenever they share the screen, the movie is really charming. The plot is pretty simple, which does work well, and the second act is decently fun to vibe to. I like the animation and how expressive it can be.
Big anime eyes.
And honestly, Four Town's music slaps. How did Billie Eilish write these songs? There's a ton of stuff to appreciate here, and I enjoyed most of the movie enough. I just wish I was able to get wrapped up in these characters and May's journey a little bit more. And I think the factor that really held this back from being a good movie for me was Ming. I hate Ming. Not as much as Boris though. I was able to learn to like May after her introduction scene, but Ming just remains so annoying and hateable throughout the entire film. The ending reconciliation with her and May is supposed to be emotional, but it didn't get much out of me because Ming showed barely any signs of changing prior to this point, nor is she really that much likable afterwards. Also, the climax is pure insanity and a little too out of control, and it has...
Is this bothering you?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I'm quite split on this movie. I did enjoy a decent portion of it, plus I love the direction it's trying to take, but it really falls apart in the overblown execution of everything. And I want to emphasize that not every film needs to click with me in the same way that Luca did in order for me to call it good. That's not really the problem with Turning Red, it's more so the presentation of it all. Still, not a bad movie, and it gave us the Four Town album, so I can't hate it.
Hello, Bond. It's time for me to give you your first mission. You gotta eat up all the doggy chow in the bowl.
Dog is a pretty cute movie that I really don't have all that much to say about. From a movie with a title like this, you'd expect something fairly simple, and that's what you get. It's just a nice road trip adventure with Channing Tatum and, you guessed it, a dog. The dog gives the best performance in the entire movie. It's really impressive to me how this is an actual real-life dog and not just a piece of CGI. I'm sure making the movie this way came with its challenges, so you get my respect there. Channing Tatum is also way more enjoyable in here than he was in Lost City, mainly because he actually fits the character he was cast as. There are a lot of cute moments in here, and the bond the two form by the end is really wholesome. With that said though, the movie is surprisingly more PG-13 than I thought it would be. Like, the main characters get kidnapped at a marijuana farm and Channing Tatum disguises himself as a blind veteran in order to get a free hotel room. I definitely can't say I was expecting that stuff, and it's nice to see a movie do a bit of a subversion on the typical cutesy road trip movie. However, while most of it is solidly enjoyable, nothing about it really sticks out as being anything amazing. There's nothing here that really grabbed me, or anything it offered that other movies didn't. Yeah, there is the surprising PG-13 touch the movie has to it, but I kinda wish they had gone farther with that. As a whole, this is still a pretty standard road trip movie, which wasn't really funny enough or emotionally interesting enough to make it become something special. Plus, the runtime is kinda too long for its own good. A plot like this probably could have been done in around 80 minutes, and it results in a lot of pacing issues during the second half. It didn't harm the movie that much though. I can't say I ever got too bored. Dog is a perfectly decent time that has nothing great, but definitely nothing awful either. Check it out if you like dogs, I guess.
Bolt the super dog!
Let me tell ya, I was not a fan of DC League of Super Pets when I first saw it. Beforehand, I thought this movie was gonna be trash given that its teaser trailer was an extended pee joke. If an animated film has a pee joke in the teaser, then that's an automatic warning to those over 10. But yeah, I really didn't like this movie on first viewing. It was pretty much what I expected to get from the marketing. Then a few months later, I rewatched it, and it got better? Like an entire star better. It's pretty rare for something like this to happen, so I don't know exactly what it is about this movie, but I found myself actually entertained on that second viewing. Still wouldn't call it great, but I definitely warmed up to a lot of it, especially with the characters. The titular League of Super Pets have an enjoyable dynamic with each other, and all of them are fairly endearing and fun. I mean, except for the pig. I still hate the pig. Why is there a pig in this movie that's supposed to be about pets? Nobody has a pig for a pet except for Nick Cage, but we'll talk about his movie later. Anyways, this team is very likable, and it's just fun to see them try and save the city together. Yeah, the plot is definitely very generic and kiddified, and there are a ton of annoying cliches that the movie really doesn't do anything interesting with. But after a little bit, the simplicity becomes oddly charming and complements the movie fairly well. The sense of humor here actually works sometimes, and it even reminded me a bit of the Lego movies. I got some laughs that I wasn't expecting due to this movie's surprisingly good comedic timing. Plus, unlike a lot of other generic kids movies, the heart in this movie actually feels kinda genuine. There's this really touching scene towards the middle where we're shown the backstory of the Kevin Hart dog, all without any dialogue. Honestly, I would say it's pretty effective. It made me feel things. This is the last movie in the world that I would expect to even get the slightest bit emotionally invested in, but here we are. There's nothing here that'll make you sob, but it was a welcome surprise that this doesn't feel like a completely hollow kids movie. The film really gets weighed down in the third act and climax, which goes on for way too long and tries to treat this as a way bigger superhero movie than it needed to be. The villain Guinea Pig had her moments, but after a while she got really annoying and I wish she was in the movie less. Otherwise though, this surprisingly wasn't bad at all. Not sure what happened during that first viewing, maybe I was just cranky, but whatever it was, I definitely treated it too harshly. Not the best animated superhero movie out there, but a nice time with a fair amount of stuff to enjoy. Out of all 50 movies in this ranking, Bullet Train is possibly the most bizarre out of all of them. This movie is crazy, to say the least. You would probably expect a basic action flick going in, but the movie actually has so much going on at once to the point where it's a little hard for me to find another movie to compare it to. That craziness factor might be why so many people really dug this movie, and while I love insanity when it's done well, it didn't fully work for me in this one. Even when you're making a movie as insane as this, you gotta have some type of structure to not entirely lose the audience. Bullet Train is clearly trying to have a structure that's different from the norm, but it kinda falls apart and becomes really messy. I can see the attempts here to have 3 different points of focus, with those 3 points being Agent Ladybug's mission, Lemon and Tangerine, and Prince holding Kumura hostage. These are all interesting plotlines on their own, and it eventually becomes cool to see the ways each of them interfere with another and how they intersect. However, throughout the first hour or so, the movie is really confusing and hard to follow. The balance in screen time between the 3 groups is just non-existent. especially with the prince. Like, her plot will disappear for 20 minutes at a time and then pop back up out of nowhere. Because of the large amount of stuff going on and the movie having to juggle a lot simultaneously, a lot of the plot points and character motivations just don't get fleshed out enough or aren't explained at all. This problem could have been solved if the movie actually bothered to have a first act, you know, showing all these characters prior to them getting on the train. That way, we would have had time to establish what these characters wanted and what they were doing, rather than having to do that in the midst of the actual plot. Yeah, this movie's disorganized and weird, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy myself while watching it. It may have really stumbled in the storytelling, but it succeeds in being pure chaotic fun. If you're just looking for dumb, mindless action, this movie certainly delivers, and that's not a bad thing. The final act especially is just awesome. Parts like this are where the movie's clustered nature actually works, because it's adding something to the situation and how intense it is. Generally, it gets a lot better by the second half, since we've gotten a good feel for these characters and what they're trying to do at that point. The ways the groups intervene and mess with each other's plans can honestly be pretty clever, and given all the setup with each plotline in the first half, it's satisfying to see them pay off and finally connect. Also, the soundtrack slaps. They play the Japanese version of I Need a Hero during the climax. I mean, hey, you gotta get inspired somewhere. As a whole, Bullet Train is a weird, confusing, unstructured mess, but it's definitely a weird, confusing, unstructured mess that I had a fun time with. Folks, we have finally made it. I know it's been an hour, but we are officially in good movie territory, aka the movies I gave a 7 out of 10 or higher. It's technically not far off from last year where there were 24 good movies on the list, but it's still nice that over 50% of the ranking is positive. And even then, I thought the last couple of movies were decently enjoyable. Wait, what am I supposed to be talking about in this segment? Oh yeah, that's right, Bubble is a pretty good movie. Not that Bubble, this Bubble, the anime. I can't say I expected a ton from this one. The reviews weren't exactly the greatest and made me a little hesitant to check it out. But I'm actually glad I did, because I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. It still has its fair share of flaws, and they're kinda hard to ignore. The plot is pretty generic, and I was never able to get rid of the feeling that this is just a worse version of Weathering With You. Seriously, it may not seem like that on the surface, but the movie is way closer to that than, say, The Little Mermaid. There's also a lot of elements that went really underdeveloped, like pretty much all the side characters or the backstory of this bubble apocalypse thing. They never even attempted to explain where these bubbles came from, so that's odd. But I don't think the movie's story is necessarily its driving factor. That would be the gorgeous visuals. The aesthetic of this world is incredible, and the color palette is a treat for the eyes. All of this visual wonder adds to some truly amazing parkour sequences and a really thrilling climax. This scene right here still takes my breath away. I mean, just look at it and tell me it doesn't look incredible. Obviously, good animation can't save weak writing, and this movie does struggle a bit in the story department, but whenever the movie isn't trying to be complex in ways it can't handle, it's pretty charming stuff. I love Uta and her curiosity towards everything. It's nice to see her learn about the human world and hang out with this gang. I found her connection with Hibiki especially endearing, and Hibiki himself is a character I really got wrapped up in after they revealed his backstory. The movie is definitely at its best when it's just focused on these two, but the rest of the movie isn't too bad either. Certainly not perfect, but a gorgeously animated and charming film that I guarantee you is better than the other Netflix bubble movie from this year.
I'm a superhero!
Even though 2022 was the time I got into anime, both in movies and series, I've never had the urge to start watching any of the big franchises. Stuff like Dragon Ball or Pokemon just seems so huge, and it'd be a little overwhelming for me to get into them this late in the game. But I did go see this new Dragon Ball movie because I was bored, and honestly I'm surprised I found myself enjoying it. Even for somebody who has no idea who these characters are or how this world works, the film does a decent job setting up its story, just to the point where newcomers can understand what's going on. This isn't the most easily accessible film ever, and it'll undoubtedly go over better with fans than with non-fans such as myself. But if you're just looking at this as its own thing, then it's a pretty good time. I was able to latch onto and get interested in these characters pretty quickly, and the humor is solid too. Gamma 2 is the second most based character in all of fiction, like Gamma 1 is probably jealous of this guy. Dr. Mito is also really cool. He's like if you combine Bling Bling Boy and Syndrome, truly a one-of-a-kind character. The action scenes are pretty awesome, and where the animation shines the most. However, in every scene that's not some sort of battle, I can't say I was crazy about this movie's animation style. I get what it's trying to do with a bit of a cel-shaded look, and in still frames it does look nice, but most of the smaller character movements just look awkward. But hey, for a computer animated anime, it could have been a lot worse. Plus, like I said, it does look really good during the action scenes, which helps a lot because it takes up like the final third of the movie. The emotional moments during that time didn't make me feel much, mostly because I'm new to the franchise and I'm not super attached to these characters, actors, but that's more so a nitpick. This movie isn't great and is pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of things, but it's an enjoyable time that was able to satisfy someone who knows nothing about the franchise. If I were to rate it, I would probably give it a 6,300 out of 9,000.
Shut up, fart knocker!
Back in my Minions 2 review, I talked about the craziness factor and how that movie failed to use it in a way that was funny or enjoyable. And in the review, I brought up Beavis and Butt-Head Do the Universe as a movie that does use the craziness factor in a way that's funny and enjoyable. It's honestly kinda incredible how well this movie does it. The film as a whole isn't even close to perfect, but it's probably the perfect example of how to do pure insanity the correct way. Unlike Minions 2, this movie has a clear goal of what it wants to do, and the joke it wants to tell, that joke being that Beavis and Butt-Head are stupid. That makes it sound like a dumb movie, and this is a dumb movie, but it's the right kind of dumb movie. The crazy stuff these two get into and the ways they accidentally escalate the situation they are in is just so fun to watch, and I was always excited to see what random thing would happen next. I already went over the plot in the other video, so you can go watch that, but to sum it up, yeah, this movie is weird, but it executes this ridiculous story so well. No matter how crazy it gets, it never lost me because it had something for me to latch onto, that being Beavis and Butt-Head themselves. The fact that they're always oblivious to what's going on around them can be pretty funny because of the ways the writers play around with this running joke. This way, the movie is able to be offbeat while still being consistently funny. That is, up until the last 30 minutes or so, where the movie becomes a bit more tame and the joke gets worn thin. This type of humor definitely suits 22-minute TV episodes better than it does for a feature film. And while it's not meant to be emotional, I still didn't really care all that much about Beavis and Butt-Head arguing and splitting up towards the end. The movie has been insane up to this point. Why did you need to throw in a generic poopy trope out of nowhere? Also, the animation style isn't really my favorite and kinda looks off at points. Still though, I definitely recommend this movie just for how purely insane it is and how it manages to be stupid in a way that actually pays off. Plus, even if it does get weaker by the third act, the backwards driving car chase is still awesome. Gives Fast and Furious a run for its money, TBH.
So, you really didn't like it? I thought it was pretty good, actually. Like, maybe not the best, but it had some redeeming values in it. It was trash!
I get the feeling this segment is gonna make me a lot of new enemies. And I don't say that for the usual reason. I mean, we've been out of mediocre movie territory for a while now. The movie in this spot is something that people loathe, yet I enjoyed a fair amount. Skip to this time if you just want to go to spot number 23, but here goes. Thor: Love and Thunder is a pretty good movie. Not amazing by any means, and definitely no match for Ragnarok. I mean, it's not even close. But this one keeps just enough of that movie's greatness intact to the point where I can say I was satisfied with the end result. Like a lot of Phase 4 Marvel stuff, it is very flawed. Even with a filmmaker as talented as Taika Waititi on board, the cracks in recent Marvel movies still show themselves. First and most obviously, some of the special effects are not good. Moving on. A fair amount of the humor is considerably less funny than last time, and definitely feels more forced. Is there a single person who found the screaming goats funny? No, I'm asking a question. Did anybody like the goats? I sure didn't.
I'm putting them down!
The movie also has a lot of tonal problems, mainly in the first half. Korg is a lot more annoying, which sucks because he was the best part of Ragnarok. And as a whole, it feels like Waititi is trying too hard to capture the success of Ragnarok, and not really succeeding. This movie has its fair share of issues, and I can definitely see why it didn't go over well with most fans. But in spite of its flaws, this one has a clear vision of what it wants to do, and it's able to pull that off in a way that's enjoyable. The jokes that are funny are legitimately funny. Not hysterical, but there's still a lot of charm and wit here thanks to how well the cast plays off each other. I still love Thor, Valkyrie, and Jane. They're just fun characters, and I like seeing them go on this quest together. I don't even mind that the Guardians aren't here, because the movie might have become a little more bloated if we had all these extra characters along for the ride. The villain is also really great, probably my favorite out of the Phase 4 villains. I wasn't sure where they were trying to go with him at first, but once he got more scenes to be villainous, he did become threatening. All of this leads up to a genuinely pretty awesome climax that I had loads of fun watching. In fact, a lot of the action here is just as engaging and fun as it was last time. I also loved the ways this movie expanded on both Jane and Thor's characters. I was actually interested in their relationship, more so than, say, Strange and Christine from that movie. In this one, I really liked the way they brought back Jane and added something new to her. The interactions she has with Thor are legitimately compelling, and it leads up to an ending that actually kinda hits. And the epilogue was a really satisfying way for Thor's journey to wrap up. Until they inevitably make a 5th movie, but I'll probably have given up on the MCU by then and just not watch that. I will acknowledge that Thor Love and Thunder is not a perfect movie. I will acknowledge that it needs some more time in the oven to become something stronger than what it ended up being. But in spite of its glaring faults, there's a lot that I liked here, and enough to the point where I can call this a good movie. Is it fantastic? No, not really. But is it a solid, fun time? Absolutely.
My, you have big balls.
Paws the Fury, The Legend of Hank is amazing. Relatively speaking, of course.
You left out the R.
Still though, I am proud to stand up and say that I really liked this movie. I can see why others didn't like it that much, but for me it was a really enjoyable film with quite a few elements that I actually admired. The comedy is actually pretty sharp, and while not every joke lands, the style really helps give the movie its own flair. The self-aware jokes never actually got on my nerves and were executed pretty well. The characters are all very likable, and I liked watching their interactions, as generic as they may be. Some of the action is cool, the soundtrack is amazing, and that opening credit sequence is just straight up fire. This movie is never really able to entirely shake off its shell of being a basic animated movie for children, and I do wish it had done that. Maybe they could have given it a cooler animation style, or gone all out with a comedy, throwing in all different types of jokes. I don't know, just something to make the experience of watching this stick out a bit more. I still think the movie stumbles in the final act with an overly long climax and a pretty lame way of wrapping things up, but the characters, some of the humor, and the animation are still able to make this a good movie. You can watch my review if you want to hear more of my thoughts, and if you haven't seen the movie yet, I would recommend checking it out. It's a pretty good movie and definitely worth at least one watch. Don't watch Bad Hamster though, it will traumatize you. I usually like to be nice and flexible when it comes to deciding which movies count for the list and which ones don't. The main rule I have is whatever year a movie was fully released in the US, that's the ranking it's gonna go on. This is why you'll be seeing Belle and Pompa the Cinephile later on this list, because their US release dates fell during 2022. The movie in this spot is a little weird though, because I watched it back in January when the year began, and I figured it counted as a 2021 film. But then later on I saw it was being theatrically released in the US during May, so by my rules, I guess it counts for this ranking. Then again, Dogtanian and the Three Muskhounds is marked as a 2022 film on iTunes underneath its amazing Americanized title, so I guess I have to include Dogtanian in the ranking yet again? Screw it, not worth it. Release dates are weird. But you know what's even weirder than that? Around the World in 80 Days is a really good movie. I'm actually being serious right now, 100%. For what looks like a garbage baby movie you'd find in the $5 bin at Walmart, this is actually a solidly made animated film that I think stands up decently well, even when compared to the bigger animated films this year. But even for as much as I've joked about this movie in the past, it has some stuff I can admit I wasn't big on. The story and most of the characters are pretty generic and standard, and they've been done better elsewhere. The pacing feels a little weird since the movie is really short. They could have done some more stuff with the villain, and the way she's defeated is kinda dumb. And this is not exactly a thought-provoking work of art that will forever change your life, unlike some of the other movies we've gotten this year. But despite all that stuff, I find this film to be oddly charming and fun. I was never bored during this. The story may not be groundbreaking, but I like the characters and they make this journey pretty captivating, to be honest. The monkey is a decent protagonist, but thankfully he's paired with the much more awesomer and epicer icon/influencer known as Phileas. Best character ever. I don't know what it is, but this guy is really fun to watch, and he has so many great lines. These two work so well off each other, and their interactions make even the slower moments enjoyable. I liked the other frog too, and the movie has a very nice vibe to it when the three of them are going on the adventure. The comedy in this film is actually pretty strong. You get your typical kids movie jokes and a fidget spinner reference. But otherwise, the movie actually feels like it has its own sense of humor, and it got quite a few laughs and chuckles from me thanks to the comedic timing paired with the good voice acting. I mean, the good voice acting in the European version. We don't talk about the American one.
So, we have a cactus-sucking frog and his grammar police monkey.
See, that line isn't really funny on paper, but the way the scorpion dude says it just cracks me up for some reason. Same applies to the scene where Phileas eats the map. That sounds stupid, but the way Phileas just casually says,
I kinda hate it.
That's honestly really funny.
We'll just use the, backup map. That was the backup map!
Oh shit. The movie overall has a bit of its own direction to it that I wasn't expecting, but I definitely appreciated. Even the animation, while not groundbreaking, actually incorporates some 2D effects, which is really cool. Plus the character designs and movements are also pretty good for the most part. The movie is just really fun, energetic, and likable to the point where its shell of being a generic kids movie didn't interfere with my enjoyment of it, as opposed to something like Super Pets. There's nothing here that's amazing, but I think most of it is executed well enough for me to call this a worthwhile experience. I'm being serious right now. If you haven't seen this movie, it wouldn't actually actually hurt to give it a watch. Trust me, it's way better than it looks. Far from the best animated film of this year, but it's a surprisingly good movie that I had a blast with. Stan Phileas.
Wanna see me run to that mountain and back? You wanna see me do it again?
If you know me, you'd know that I absolutely love the work of Wes Anderson and the direction his films all share. But he did The French Dispatch last year, and while that movie was phenomenal, it means he didn't release anything this year due to his next project still being in the works. So the closest thing we have to a Wes Anderson film this year is See How They Run, a witty murder mystery that I surprisingly enjoyed a lot more than I thought I was going to. It's a very well-directed movie, especially for someone who hasn't made a feature film prior to this one, but it's not exactly the most original style. You've probably heard this before, but this film feels very Wes Anderson-y, from the cinematography to the dialogue to even the cast. I mean, we're talking about a Searchlight Pictures movie that was also produced by TSG Entertainment and has Saoirse Ronan and Adrian Brody. Do you know what other movie fits that exact description? The French Dispatch.
Coincidence? I think not!
While directors taking inspiration from each other is fine, this one feels a little too close to Anderson's catalog, to the point where it feels less like a tribute and more like a cheaper and admittedly less good copycat. I was never able to shake the feeling that this movie wasn't as sharply written or funny as the best of Anderson's work. On its own, however, this is a really smart and fun time. It took a while to grab me due to some poor pacing in the first act, and I wish this whodunit mystery was more laser focused, kinda like Knives Out. But the movie keeps getting better and better as it goes along, due to the mystery getting consistently more interesting and the great comedy. Seriously, I laughed a ton during this movie. Wes Anderson's style of comedy is done justice here, and it results in more than a few great moments. I especially like the interactions between Stoppard and Stalker, both of whom are pretty likable. It's fun to see them go around investigating, and the movie didn't really lose me at any point. The entire final act is honestly great. The reveal as to who the villain was is done really well, and actually ties into the rest of the story quite nicely. Plus, the movie is at its funniest here.
I wanted to stop the film and the play. What film? What play?
Overall, See How They Run is a really good movie, just not quite as good as it clearly wants to be. It doesn't capture the greatness of Wes Anderson, but if you look at it on its own merits, it's a very entertaining mystery with tremendously funny comedy.
Canis lupus, a fearsome sheep-eating monster more commonly known as wolf.
The Bad Guys is an enjoyable, solidly written, and really cool return to form for good old DreamWorks. I reviewed it a while back, so I'll keep this brief, but yeah, I really do like this movie. Not only is the animation super fun, unique, and expressive, but the cast is also great, and they can be a lot of fun to just vibe to. Plus, a few of the jokes do land. The movie has a ton of cool action sequences, especially in the climax. The guinea pig wave is legitimately awesome. I mean, just look at this thing. I love the soundtrack, and the Good Tonight scene is one of my favorites from any movie on the list. This is all around just a really fun, really cool movie that is still able to be enjoyable for kids while also having an extra appeal for older audiences. And no, I'm not talking about Diane Foxington. However, with all that stuff said, I can't really shake the feeling that this movie is a tad bit overhyped. Again, I really like it, and it does have quite a few creative and unique things, but the story is still pretty generic and it doesn't really make any big attempts to cover that up. It especially becomes really lame with the villain and the super tropey third act. It doesn't drag the movie as a whole down too much, but it does kinda irritate me. Is this one of my favorite movies of the year? No. Is this one of my favorite animated movies of the year? Not quite. Did this movie single-handedly bring the studio into a new era? Probably not. It's kinda too early to tell. We're just gonna have to wait and see what their upcoming movies have in store. But this, along with Puss in Boots 2, are most certainly steps in the right direction, and I can safely say that I am optimistic about their future. Much like After Sun, Tar was a movie I had very high expectations for, probably because of the large amount of praise I saw going towards it and some Oscar consideration for Cate Blanchett as the titular character. And yeah, I'm pretty much on board with that. Kate's performance as Lydia is just incredible, and she really ramps up the personality of this character, especially in the second half when she starts to get crazier. I actually burst out laughing in the theater when she starts ranting about her neighbors while playing the accordion. She definitely deserves the Oscar for Best Leading Actress. I mean, who could she possibly be going up against? Yeah, okay, never mind. So yeah, her performance is obviously great, but the rest of the movie didn't quite satisfy me as much. I was a little worried this movie would completely fail to click, especially during the first half hour, which was really boring.
Did you just use the B word?
The opening of this movie being filled with long, dull conversations that go up to almost 10 minutes really did not leave a good first impression. Movies focused specifically on the dialogue and conversations between the characters can work for me, but because this is the beginning of the movie and I don't really know who these characters are, Tar, it was pretty hard for me to get invested. Imagine my excitement when I realized I would be watching the movie for another 2 hours. Thankfully though, as it goes on, we get more insight into Lydia Tar and who she is, and I eventually grasp where the movie was going. After that, the conversations become far more interesting because it feels like they're gradually leading the movie in a certain direction. That direction being Lydia Tar's descent into madness and losing everything in her life. It's really gripping and sometimes even messed up. This angle really makes the movie stick out from other art house films and biopics, and when reading up on the movie, that was probably the intention. Either way, I thought it was an interesting direction for the movie to take, and it led to me getting more invested in Lydia's relationships with the people around her. What I admire about this movie is that it actually realizes how much of a monster the main character is. You're supposed to get invested in Lydia's character, sure, but the movie doesn't feel like it's trying to paint her as a good guy. You don't feel bad for her when she loses everything and people walk out on her, because the decisions she makes leading up to those points make it feel deserved. It isn't until the ending when the movie tries to shine a new light on her after she has hit rock bottom, and I thought that was a great conclusion. It's not a perfect movie because quite a few scenes drag on, even outside of the first 30 minutes, and maybe they could have cut some of this stuff out because not all of it was really necessary. But regardless, this was still a great movie that I'm glad picked itself up as much as it did. Probably not as good as the film they were making in Pompo the Cinephile though.
Sure, a lot is happening, but I wish I brought my napkin thing.
I actually have a funny story about Happening. You see, the only reason I was aware of this critically acclaimed foreign movie's existence is because of another critically acclaimed foreign movie, that being Around the World in 80 Days. Once I heard that the film was getting a US release date in May, I rushed to find showtimes. There were none, but at least the Fandango release schedule brought Happening to my attention. So to anybody who's happy to see this movie on the list, don't thank me, thank Phileas. Anyways, Happening is a great movie. I'll admit that I expected it to be a bit better than it actually was, but this is still a really well done drama that tackles the subject of abortion in a way that it needs to be tackled. I got really invested in Anne's character once she found out she was pregnant, and I wanted so badly for her to get out of the situation. Given where and when this movie takes place, it's actually a pretty petrifying situation for this character to get into, and all that is enhanced by the fantastic directing. This movie is not afraid to show the absolute horror of the situation on screen, with chilling music adding to that feeling. Needless to say, it's scary, but that's working in the movie's favor because it feels like it's handling the subject matter with all the seriousness that it deserves to be handled with. It's great to have a movie like this come out in the midst of the unfortunate events that have happened in the US throughout the past year. That's more so a coincidence considering the movie was made in France and it came out over there in 2021, but I digress. Not everything about the movie really worked, and dealing with our conflict and trying to get an abortion had me really hooked, but outside of that, nothing was particularly interesting. It's not a huge issue since the abortion stuff takes up most of the runtime, but I still wish I cared about any of the other characters. Most of Anne's interactions with them just feel kind of stale, and I wish the movie had developed these relationships a bit more. Especially with our parents, those scenes were kinda boring. But again, the film really grabbed me with Anne's struggle, and the way it handles the topic of abortion. I'm gonna end the segment here though, because this is really a movie I want you to seek out for yourself, rather than just listening to me talk about it. It is important to watch given current events, on top of just being a gripping, well-directed, and well-acted film. Definitely worth a watch, and I'm glad this movie did not go under my radar.
I've decided to become a musician.
Inu-Oh absolutely slaps. This is hands down one of the most unique films I saw throughout this year, which I guess is to be expected given that it was directed by Masaki Yuasa. His films are known for being more trippy and bizarre, with bouncy animation and wild concepts. This style doesn't always work, but when it does, he's able to make some really neat films, and Inu-Oh is most certainly one of them. With that said, it's probably one of his less crazy works. The story on paper still captures the strangeness of Yuasa's filmmaking, but the actual execution is a bit more tame and never really goes off the wall. I don't really mind that though, since the movie is still able to pull me in through its really cool story.
Jumpin' jacks, hit him!
This is a movie about a weird dancing demon guy teaming up with a blind musician to put on rock and roll concerts, leading to them sweeping the nation of Japan during the 14th century. How could you listen to that synopsis and tell me that it's not awesome? I've never seen a movie quite like this one, because even if the plot is kind of vague and basic, the concepts really make it stick out. And it handles those concepts in a really fun and interesting way. The concert scenes in this are just incredible. The music is straight up fire, and paired with the visuals, it makes for a dazzling experience. And oh yeah, the animation style in this is also beyond fantastic. It perfectly fits with the setting of the film, and is made even more stunning by the movement and the insane final performance. Like I said, the movie is sort of light on story with no clear goal for most of the runtime. But that doesn't really matter all that much because what's happening on screen is still wicked as heck, and the movie does a great job getting me invested in these characters. I really liked the relationship between Tamari and the titular character. It's really nice stuff, and I enjoy the way they work off each other. The movie is a bit slow towards the beginning and doesn't really prepare you for the odd stuff that follows. Plus, it kinda doesn't focus on some things as much as it probably should have. Like in the opening narration, we're told about this war between the two sides of the nation and these three sacred treasures, but that stuff doesn't factor into the rock and roll story, so it ends up feeling a little out of place. Still though, this film goes hard, and you should absolutely give it a watch. It has less Letterboxd views than the Buck Wild movie, and I will not stand for that. It's an awesome, underrated, abstract film that's more than worth your time. Originally, I was going to end the segment by saying the movie deserves an Oscar nomination over its far weaker competition, but after seeing Puss in Boots 2, if that were to steal Inu-Oh's spot, yeah, I'd be cool with that.
I'm gonna give Paddington 2 an A.
As you can see, this year was stacked with great movies, and it was hard to arrange them at points. In fact, I considered moving down the unbearable weight of massive talent a few spots because it didn't really seem to offer as much compared to the other stuff we got this year. But then I watched the movie for a second time, and I threw that ridiculous thought out the window. This is a really fun time, like I forgot how much of a blast it is. Hands down, one of the funniest movies on the entire list. It has so much witty energy, and it uses the premise of the movie in a really smart way. You'd think a movie about Nicolas Cage playing Nicolas Cage would be dumb and obnoxious, kind of like a certain other movie. But no, to my surprise, this movie doesn't really rely on meta jokes. I mean, aside from the extremely epic Croods 2 reference, aw yeah! Most of the humor just comes naturally from the interactions of the characters, and these characters are just so enjoyable. I love the bond Nick forms with Javi, and the two have great chemistry as actors. Like, why aren't they in more movies together? The adventures they go on in this are really charming and fun. I could vibe to that stuff all day. Not only is that plot great, but I also really like Nick getting accidentally recruited by the CIA to perform an investigation on Javi's compound. It's like Cars 2 if it were cleverly written, and it leads to a lot of fun scenarios for Nick to get himself into. Surprisingly enough, these two sides of the story blend together very well, and it never feels like one is fighting for screen time against the other. Although the way they collide is pretty messy, and while the action in the climax is cool, the build up to that was a bit rushed. The villain wasn't fantastic either. He's supposed to be a twist villain, I think, but he's in one scene prior to the reveal. It just seemed like a lazy way to hide the fact that Javi's cousin was the actual kidnapper, and there's definitely another movie this year that did that better. Otherwise though, I really dug this movie. It's not deep or extremely emotional or anything like that, but it is hilarious and loads of fun, and really, that's all it needed to be. I mentioned this in last year's ranking, but I'm not really the biggest horror movie guy. Most of them just don't really pop out to me or intrigue me enough for me to go check them out. But thanks to a friend who was willing to make deals with the devil, I saw both Bodies, Bodies, Bodies and Barbarian this year. You see, I agreed to watch this movie if he would watch, something not good. I didn't expect a ton from this movie either, as I assumed it just wouldn't be my thing. But honestly, it was pretty great. I'm surprised. This looked like it'd be every other low-budget horror movie ever. It's literally titled Barbarian. How much more basic can you get? The movie itself is a bit generic. I'm positive there have been plenty other films like this one in past years. But what really elevates this one above others is the stellar directing. It builds up such an unsettling atmosphere that gets increasingly more tense as it goes along. That's all thanks to how well the music and the cinematography blend together, making for something truly off-putting. But that's working in the movie's favor since it really enhances the scary vibe. However, that alone isn't enough to save the entire thing. Remember when I was talking about Fall and I said that an effective thriller does not equal a good movie? And no, of course you don't remember that. That was like an hour ago. But yeah, the same thing applies to horror movies. Being as scary as possible does not mean your movie is good if it isn't well written or compelling. Thankfully though, Barbarian is a horror movie that feels like it earns the scares it throws your way because it leads up to them in a way that's pretty interesting. And it does this twice, I might add. Yeah, this movie is separated into two halves, both of which focus on a character having to go to this weird house, going into the basement, and then getting trapped by the monster that lives down there. Or I guess you can say the momster that lives down there. Admittedly, I found the beginning of the first story with Tess and Keith a bit slow, mainly because it didn't feel like it was going anywhere. But then once Tess goes down into the basement and gets attacked by the monster, they immediately cut to the next story, and now you have a better sense of where this one is gonna go. And the second half is especially great because Justin Long's character is a horrible human being, and it's fun to see him get trapped by the monster and then die. Bro goes down into the creepy, dark, secret basement because he wants to measure the square feet to see how much he can sell the house for. He's genuinely such an idiot, but the movie is aware of that, and it's hilarious. I wish they explored explored the backstory of the basement monster a bit more because it ends up feeling a little glossed over by the ending. Plus, the film does have obnoxious horror movie cliches, such as the main character calling the authorities who don't believe their story, and characters going down into the dangerous basement just because. Given how well everything else is done, those moments are kind of bothersome, and they do stick out. But not quite enough to ruin the experience. This is still an impressive horror movie that took me by surprise, and actually feels a little unique compared to the other ones. If only a very limited number of horror flicks were able to make their way into the selection, then I'm glad this was one of them.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Goodbye Don Glees is a really weird movie. Not weird in its style like Inu-Oh was, but weird in the sense that it just puzzles me so much. I've been thinking back to it a lot recently, and whenever I do that, I always picture it as this emotionally sweeping, gorgeous masterpiece. That's partially accurate to how it actually is, but sitting down to watch the movie and actually voicing my opinions on it, I can't really call it perfect. It sucks because most of the movie is really, really strong. There are just some elements that don't quite click or could have been done better. First of all, the movie is trying way too hard to be sad, and it works. I came pretty close to crying during the final act and the last 5 minutes especially. But sometimes it just gets so caught up in trying to get an emotional reaction from the audience that it puts everything else on hold. Like I said, I usually prefer movies that insert emotions in a way that's subtle and not overbearing. This one has a lot of moments where the movie is practically screaming, "This is the sad part!" And despite some of those moments working, it feels like the movie is kinda overplaying some of this stuff. There's this chunk in the middle where the characters stop to rest and camp out, and it's just sad scene after sad scene after sad scene for 15 minutes straight. Not all of it really gelled with me, and I wish the movie had spent more time on the actual adventure these kids were going on. Plus, the movie has some pacing issues, confusing shark jumping in the final act, the English songs are kinda bad, and I can't help but feel like the film was just slightly held back from being the remarkable work of art it clearly wants to be. It's kinda disappointing. But I still absolutely love it. This is such a delightful and lovely movie to the point where I would consider it to be something truly special. I don't know what it is exactly, but I found something about this movie's story and atmosphere so endearing that it was able to suck me in despite all of the glaring story problems. The plot just rides the perfect balance of having an end goal that the characters need to accomplish and just being a great hangout movie to relax and enjoy. The setup of 3 teenagers being blamed for a forest fire and having to go on a journey to find the evidence that can prove themselves innocent is interesting, but also simple enough to allow room to expand upon the characters. And the trio that we focus on in this movie is just absolutely wonderful. Toto, Roma, and Drop are all just beaming with life, and I cared about their characters from the moment they each got introduced. Maybe I'm biased since I am around the same age as these guys, but I found their struggles and motivations really genuine. They don't feel like cliche teen characters that are seen so often in movies similar to this one. They're so down to earth that they feel real, and the emotional moments can really strike a chord. Yeah, the movie is kinda trying too hard to strike that chord, but it doesn't change that I was so invested in these guys that I was wrapped up in their relationship with each other and the stuff they were going through in their separate lives. And even ignoring that, the 3 just work so well off each other and their dynamic is incredibly charming. Most of the scenes that hit the hardest for me weren't even the emotional moments, but instead they were the parts that solely focus on this group of teens just living life and having fun together. It radiates that feeling of endless summer during youth, which complements the movie's plot and themes so well. I love watching these 3 hang out with each other. I love watching them desperately trying to open a can without a can opener. I love watching them race down a hill with the promise of the winner getting a soda. During moments like these, I can see the passion and memories of the people who made this movie brewing on the screen in such a beautiful way. This all culminates with an absolutely amazing ending that left me watching the credits with a smile on my face and maybe even some tears in my eyes. It's hard for me to explain, but in spite of all its issues, this is a movie that I think will go on to hold a very special place in my heart in the coming years. The problems I mentioned are enough to get on my nerves, unlike something like Luca, where its emotional impact completely overshadows any nitpicks I would have with it. But at the end of the day, this movie still works, and it works so well. I really hope more people will check it out in the future, since it's a shame how little attention it's gotten. Again, this has less Letterboxd views than the Buck Wild movie has. Why must the world be like this? I don't know, but what I do know is that this is one great movie, and I highly recommend the almost masterpiece that is Goodbye Don Glees.
Oh my gosh, it's Batman!
Batman was never really one of my favorite superheroes. Even as a kid, he just didn't seem that interesting to me, and the only piece of Batman content I have a strong attachment to would be Lego Batman the movie, DC Superheroes Unite. When I was 9, that movie was like the peak of cinema. Anyways, I'm surprised I loved the Batman as much as I did. I knew it was going to be good, but this good? I'm impressed. Even if I'm not the biggest Batman guy, this movie has such great directing that offers a take on the character that really sucked me in. It's annoying when movies try so desperately to to be gritty and edgy and cool, but the Batman doesn't feel like it falls into that category at all. The dark tone and atmosphere the movie sets up is one it stays committed to throughout the entire runtime. It never feels like the movie is trying too hard to follow in the footsteps of other incarnations of this character. Yeah, it does follow similar grounds in the way the story is written, but everything else the film offers, from its cinematography to its dialogue to its action, or more so the lack of it, help the movie become its own thing. And the thing that it is certainly really great. The film wastes no time establishing what it's going to be about and how it's going to go about telling the story. Even if the movie has a lot of moving parts, the pacing and the way the pieces are connected really helped captivate me and make this a super interesting mystery plot. I know Batman movies are usually more driven by the story than they are by the action and superhero aspects, and this one really puts a heavy focus on the plot. But I'm not complaining at all, because there's more than enough here to keep my attention and keep the plot steadily flowing throughout the 3-hour runtime. Although this movie is kinda like the anti-Bullet Train in the sense that the pieces are balanced out well at first, but they start to become a little jumbled by the last hour or so. Maybe the script could have used a rewrite or two in order to be trimmed down a bit, because I feel like this movie could have been done in, say, 140 minutes as opposed to 175. That, and the climax doesn't feel quite as thrilling as it should have been. Still really good though, and I love the car chase towards the middle. It's incredibly well shot. Not really my favorite superhero movie or anything, or heck, even as good as the Lego Batman movie, but this film still goes hard with its well-written story, its dark tone, and of course, its really awesome music. Great movie, and I can't wait to see what Matt Reeves does with this character next.
It's so cute. I want to murder.
Marcel the Shell with Shoes On is literally the cutest film that has ever been made. How could you look at Marcel and think that he's not adorable? He's on the list of characters that I would protect with all costs if they existed. A list that consists of him, Perito, and nobody else. But yeah, if you couldn't tell, I really loved this movie. Not because it's deep or complex or groundbreaking or anything like that, but because, like I said, it's just cute. Much like My Neighbor Totoro or Wolf Children or Paddington, this is a movie that is so simple and wholesome that it's impossible not to love it. However, I didn't love this one as much as I would have wanted to, or as much as the movies I just mentioned. Part of that is because it might be a little too simple for its own good. I appreciate it not trying to do anything grand because they really didn't need to do that. I just wish it had a bit more focus, like they could have had the entire thing be about Marcel trying to find his family, or they could have separated it all into a bunch of little stories. But honestly, who cares about that? It's Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. It's not supposed to be driven by the story, it's driven by how sweet, lovable, and innocent it all is. Unlike in Aftersun where the direction wasn't enough to make up for the lack of story, the direction in Marcel totally does. It gives off such a calm and relaxing vibe in every sense that's able to elevate whatever random thing may be going on. The characters are so charming that I can watch them sit around and do nothing but talk all day and still find it endearing. It's incredible how this is based on a series of YouTube shorts, and yet all the stuff it throws in still fits in well, and it doesn't lose its appeal even with the 90-minute runtime. If only other movies were able to do that. And on top of all this, the blending of live action and stop motion is so well done. Some of the best stop motion I've seen, honestly. It's used in a unique way that works wonders and can be pretty creative. I don't have much else to say here because this film doesn't give a whole lot to talk about, but in this instance, I'm fine with that. It's an insanely cute movie that you're definitely going to love. This is quite a big shift, huh?
We're from the Kingsman Tailors shop in London. Maybe you've heard of us.
Why does nobody talk about the outfit? Seriously, this film is amazing, and it seems like something film buffs would love, so it really stinks it hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. Heck, I didn't know of its existence until I saw a random poster for it at the theater. And I will forever thank that random poster for making me aware of this film, because it slaps. The outfit is an incredibly well-written and well-directed movie that honestly feels super unique. Not because it's really doing anything that's never been done before with its filmmaking, it's more so because of when it was made. This is a movie released in 2022, and yet it feels way closer to something from the 50s or 60s. Yeah, the movie is set during that time period, but we get plenty of movies today that are set in the past, yet the way they're made still gives off traces of being from the modern day. The outfit, on the other hand, really feels like it came from the time it was set during. The writing, the dialogue, the camera work, they don't feel modernized at all. Instead, it feels like the film is trying to pay homage to the films of the past, underneath telling its own story. And said story is surprisingly great. Miraculously, it's able to simultaneously feel chill and relaxed while also having a very high sense of tension. Like I said, this doesn't exactly feel like most crime dramas we would get today. Most of it just takes place in a single room with not many action scenes or epic showdowns or anything like that. The majority of it is just characters talking, layered on top of a story about this old guy getting involved with the mob after they accidentally come to his house one night. Keeping the plot light for a movie with a setup like this sounds like a bad idea, but surprisingly, it works really well, and even during the long periods of talking, my investment in the movie never dropped. All the dialogue and characters are so well written that this movie is still able to incorporate plenty of intensity despite that slow pace. There are enough twists and turns in here that make it more than engaging, and I thought the cast of characters was handled in a really smart way. Leonard is an interesting protagonist, but he's kind of the only character you can stay invested in. For everyone else, like the various mob members, you don't really know who to trust and who not to trust, and sometimes that can flip-flop as you watch more of the interactions with Leonard. That's just a really cool direction for a movie like this to take, and it left me on the edge of my seat as a result. However, this style of writing sort of crashes in on itself during the final act. I guess the movie felt like it needed to do something big in order for the audience to feel like something was accomplished, but it didn't really mesh well with the rest of the film. I wish they had done more with the LaFontaine family. They're mentioned a bunch throughout the film, but then they finally show up towards the ending and then exit immediately. That was kind of weird. Also, there's a confusing twist that Leonard was the one who set up the rivalry between the mob and the LaFontaines. Like, he was the one who was behind this entire operation from the get-go. I didn't really like that. I would have preferred if Leonard was just a random guy suddenly getting thrown into this situation and using his wits to navigate himself out of it. The fact that he was some super mastermind the whole time that was able to deceive a criminal organization just didn't feel right. Putting aside that stuff though, yeah, the outfit is pretty amazing. Hands down one of the most underrated movies of the year, and I don't think it gets nearly enough credit. It's sharp, it's engaging, it's all around fantastic. And to think we still haven't made it into the top 10 yet.
Thanks for the offer, but I'd rather be a
Puppet?
than a fascist.
The Del Toro Pinocchio is just phenomenal. That shouldn't be too surprising to hear because this is another one of those movies that you just can't hate, even if you tried. It's not unfathomably adorable like Marcel. In fact, it has war and characters getting shot and explosions, but underneath that, this is a super charming film that has so much heart. Most of that comes from the titular character himself and just how delightful and lovable he is. This version of the Pinocchio story really puts an emphasis on the childish nature of the character, but it never feels annoying. It put a really big smile on my face and got me invested in his relationship with Geppetto. I really love the way they executed that connection here because unlike most Pinocchio stories, the two aren't separated for nearly the entire thing. We get a decent amount of time to see these characters interact and express their emotions towards each other. It's sometimes pretty heartbreaking stuff, but it all feels believable because you understand where these characters are coming from on both sides. And then when Pinocchio leaves and Geppetto goes out to try and find him, it hits you how much he's grown from the time where he didn't even want Pinocchio around. I love how this movie makes a few small tweaks to the Pinocchio story to make it feel like both characters get to grow throughout the film. It's really powerful and all told in such a manner that keeps it consistently interesting and enjoyable. Even besides that, the changes this movie makes to the backdrop of the original tale are really neat and fit in surprisingly well. Doesn't do this as expertly as Belle does obviously, but it still makes the movie feel unique while also feeling faithful to what it's adapting. War and fascism are two things I would never expect to mention when talking about Pinocchio, but the incorporation of them here just feels natural and even feels like it's adding a little something to the themes of the story. And this goes without saying, but the stop motion in this is incredible. It took me a little while to get used to the human designs that weren't Geppetto, but the visuals all around are filled with life and passion from the filmmakers. Especially during the climax, like wow, it looks stunning. This movie has some stuff holding it back from being a full-on masterpiece for me. I wish Sebastian J. Cricket had more stuff to do because he feels kind of shoved aside for most of the runtime. And the songs, while still pretty good, are kind of forgettable and they don't really stick out. I mean, aside from one specific song that really does stick out. But those aren't able to take away much from how absolutely lovely this movie is. I'm so happy that it got to see the light of day after its troubled production history, and that Del Toro's hard work and passion towards this story really paid off. Definitely an amazing film and the best Pinocchio movie of 2022. I mean, as far as I know, it's the only one, so it automatically gets that title.
It says North Pole. You left out the R.
Whoa, you guys weren't kidding about RRR. This one is excellent, and it honestly blows my mind with how straight up awesome it is. Obviously, I expected it to be this way, but damn, it just gets so cool at points that it's honestly breathtaking. The concept of two Jews from opposite sides of the tracks teaming up to take down the British rulers of India already sounds like it can make for a great film. But it also has the potential to be a boring and generic war drama, especially with a runtime that's over 3 hours. For a movie like this to deliver on the highest level that it's able to, it really needs to go into the right hands. And these are most certainly the right hands. I wasn't super into this style of filmmaking when I started the movie, but thankfully I got into it within the first 20 minutes or so. The directing here feels like it's enhancing every beat of the story to make it more epic, more fun, more heartbreaking, more powerful. It just hits all the right beats that make for an incredible film. The story is so well written and is able to stay engaging and focused despite a lot going on in the span of 3 hours. That was definitely the biggest worry I had prior to watching this. For a movie to be that long, you really need to have a plot that's complex enough or a cast of characters that's interesting enough to warrant the runtime. And RRR manages to pull both of those things off. The film has a lot of moving parts that gradually lead up to the fight against the British in the climax instead of having that take up the entire thing. But it's assembled in a way that makes sense and got me super invested in these characters. Beam and Ram are both individually compelling, but in different ways that come come together to form a conflict that feels really smart. I usually can't stand that whole "you betrayed me, I thought we were friends" thing, but this film has possibly the best use of the trope that I've ever seen. Given how strong the bond between these two is, it crushes you like an elephant halfway through when Rom turns against his best friend and becomes basically what Beam was fighting against. And then it hits you like two elephants when Beam comes back for Rom after he's been taken prisoner, then rising up to fight together in one amazing climax. Dare I say it, the best climax out of any movie on this list. The fighting is just so cool, and it's carried out with all the tension, excitement, and emotional payoff that it needed to be carried out with. Plus, the music during this part is pretty awesome. No, actually scratch that. The music during the entire movie is awesome. The songs are all bangers, and the dance sequences are truly stunning. All that stuff is like 11 out of 10 material, but unfortunately, the movie definitely peaks in the third act. The first two acts are great as well, and there are countless fun and powerful moments, but nothing compares to that climax. The first act especially felt a little bit weak and had a hard time pulling me in, like I said. And this criticism is gonna sound weird, but I kinda wish Beam and Rom had more scenes together. Now, the friendship they form is really powerful, but the movie doesn't do the best job setting that up. I do wish we got some scenes to establish their dynamic and connection with each other after their first encounter in the bridge scene. That probably would have worked better than just using this montage and having them be best friends right afterwards. I can forgive it since the song in this montage slaps. If you somehow couldn't tell, I really loved RRR. It is phenomenal. Not sure if I'd ever have the urge to revisit it since it is long and I feel it works better as a film to just experience once, but it is most certainly one amazing experience and I can't recommend it enough.
When the imposter is sus!
2022 was a year that gave us loads of great movies in all sorts of genres, but one genre that was kinda lacking would be mystery. See How They Run was good, and I guess the Batman counts for this category, so that's another plus. But outside of that, most of the mystery movies we got throughout the past year are either not noteworthy or bad. And clearly I'm not the only one to notice this, because as soon as Rian Johnson saw, he came in to save the day with the anticipated sequel to Knives Out, Glass Onion. Oh wait, my bad, what I meant to say was Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. That title is weird. Anyway, this is a more than worthy follow-up to the first Knives Out that even improves upon it in a couple ways. I'm glad this movie focuses on a new cast instead of extending the story from the first film. That could have resulted in a sequel that feels unnecessary or just a clone of the original. Instead, Glass Onion forms a new story with no real connections to the first outside of having Benedict Blanc. Instead, Glass Onion forms a new story with no real connections with the first outside of having Benoit Blanc be the detective. I don't really mind that though, since this mystery story is also incredibly well written and fun. I feel like it was easier for me to get into this one because of the smaller cast, as well as the way the story is structured and paced. All the characters here are easy to get to know and understand their motivations and what they're all about. I feel like that's essential in a movie like this because you really need a strong cast if you want to build up a mystery. Thankfully though, this is one great group of characters, all of whom get their fair share of laughs. Because of some random tweet that spoiled it, I already knew Edward Norton was the villain before watching this movie.
No! This is the last straw. I asked for a Krabby Patty. You kept putting it aside, and now I'm mad!
However, that wasn't able to take away my investment because the mystery actually has more to it than just having a bad guy. I love mystery movies that can add in some extra spice, which is something that See How They Run was missing. But Glass Onion has such smart writing that supplies more than a few great twists. I genuinely didn't see most of them coming, and they were all revealed at the perfect times in the perfect ways. Even the Edward Norton twist, which I already knew was coming, is handled really well. The story that the actual mystery is building off of is one that I found really intriguing, and it's satisfying when all the pieces come together in the third act. And the ending when Andy blows up Miles's house and burns the Mona Lisa, that right there is cinema. Now, if only Netflix actually let this movie play in the cinema. My biggest flaw with this film is one that's kinda obvious. It's the modern stuff. I guess there's nothing inherently wrong with a movie being set during the pandemic or having an Among Us joke. I just don't really see what these elements add to the main story. If you had this movie be set in 2022, the plot would remain the same. Not a huge issue, but it did feel a little awkward and took me out of the mood a few times. Otherwise, this is a great movie with fantastic writing, all while just being really fun. Here's hoping that Rian Johnson continues his streak of banger and Knives Out movies. And here's also hoping that Daryl shows up in the third film.
You're all a bunch of...
Ruffle dragging, honey sprouting, frog, open, munching, pancake, nugget.
And you're snooter!
The internet currently seems to be in a frenzy over Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and this is one of those times where I can't even argue with a mass obsession over a movie because this one is terrific. It is so much better than it has any right to be, and it already had loads of potential to be a great movie. I'm one of the 5 people who actually really likes the original Puss in Boots movie. It's a well done and fun film, but The Last Wish crushes that one in every single aspect. The most obvious one being the animation, which I'm sure you've already heard plenty about, but yeah, it's gorgeous. The painting-like aesthetic is beautiful, and the movement and fight scenes are just so much much fun to watch. These visuals make the bad guys look like Shark Tale in comparison, if we're being honest. Having fantastic animation is one thing, but when the entire movie has a sense of energy and expressiveness to match with the animation, then you've created something truly spectacular. I laughed a ton during this movie. The comedic timing hits all the right notes, and the liveliness that the cast displays makes it a blast to watch. The story about Puss grappling with his mortality is also surprisingly really effective. Like, the movie opens with this banger musical number where Puss showcases how awesome of a hero he is, but then later on the lyrics of the song are contradicted when Puss loses the 8th of his 9 lives and has its first encounter with death. And I don't mean that metaphorically or rhetorically or poetically or theoretically or any other fancy way. He's death, straight up. During this encounter, Puss in Boots is not brave. He is touched by a blade. He's not the fearless hero that he thought he was. It's honestly not a theme I expected a movie from the Shrek franchise to tackle, but it does it so well. Admittedly, the second act isn't quite as good. It sorta has the Inside Out problem where the morals are practically spelled out in the places that these characters journey to. I do wish the messages were conveyed in a bit more of a subtle manner. It starts to feel a bit more like a standard animated adventure movie, but it's still a great adventure because Puss, Kitty, and especially Perito are all just so fun, and I love watching them interact. The bond they form throughout the film is just so wholesome and sweet. The villains are also really fantastic. I got so emotionally wrapped up in Goldie and the Three Bears, and Jack Horner is also pretty cool. Nothing compared to the Bug though, he's awesome. All of this stuff comes together for an incredible climax. Not only does it look beautiful, but it hits the right emotional beats, the fighting is out of this world, and it's just an amazing way for the story to culminate. It's simply extraordinary. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish as a whole is extraordinary. When I started working on the video, I had it ranked at number 10, but I think rewatching it and writing about it has made me appreciate it even more. For that, I'm pushing it up to number 7, and I haven't started editing the top 10 yet, so who's gonna stop me? I don't know how or why DreamWorks cooked up something this good for a Puss in Boots movie, but I'm so happy that they did. It's incredible for a franchise that had long lost relevancy outside of memes to make a comeback in a way that brings something new to the table while also feeling faithful to the series' roots. Definitely worthy of the praise it's been getting, and I can't wait to finish this video so I can go watch it 10 more times.
And in doing so, we will right the wrong done to you by the evil Drippy Brothers Studios and their actors.
Babylon was a movie I was incredibly hyped for, being a big fan of Jamie and Chazelle's work and all. But with all the praise I've given to him in my videos, there was a lot riding on his 4th feature film, as I would either be the one to show that his artistic talent as a director is still intact, or if he really is starting to lose his touch. But honestly, this movie is just further evidence of why he's one of the best directors working today. It proves everything I've been saying correct, as it brings in the magic that made Whiplash and La La Land so incredible, while also feeling like it has its own identity. 1920s Hollywood has always been an interesting setting to me, and Chazelle's directing gives it so much life and energy. I was worried this movie would be a little too nuts for me, especially in the first 10 minutes when I had absolutely no idea what to make of the insanity that was happening on screen. But the movie pulled me in afterwards, because the energy it has starts to feel more natural, and the characters are just amazing. Manny, Jack, Nellie, all their stories are interesting, and they stay that way throughout the entire movie. It's really compelling to see the different ways they try to deal with the constantly changing environment of Hollywood, and the performances are just top tier. Especially Margot Robbie as Nellie Leroy. She must have been having the time of her life with that role, because she hams it up to the max, and it is hilarious. Dare I say it, Nellie Leroy is more awesome than Phileas. I don't say that about many characters, so yeah, congratulations. I also loved Manny and Jack, and the movie does a fantastic job balancing these stories out to make for an experience that never loses its intrigue, even after 3 hours. Although the movie has some other characters who I wish were in it a bit more. Like, Lady Faye disappears for an hour, twice. It seemed like the film was trying to make her important, so I'm not sure why it didn't give her more screen time. But that doesn't subtract from how excellently written the stories of the other 3 are. And on top of being an expertly crafted work of art, Babylon is just a fun movie. I had an absolute ball while watching this, and it's one of those rare long movies that I can see myself rewatching on a regular basis. The performances are great, as I said, and offer a ton of funny moments. The music is amazing, and I can jam out to it for hours on end. The overall direction just makes it such an exciting and enjoyable time. Man, I loved this movie so much. It has a couple flaws here and there that keep it back from being the peak of Chazelle's career, but it's still a worthy successor to both Whiplash and La La Land. I'm disappointed that this movie didn't do well at the box office and that Rotten Tomatoes doesn't look fondly upon it. But whatever, that doesn't matter. This is still a beyond incredible film that you should definitely check out. Also, PJ Byrne briefly shows up in this. I guess he likes being in stuff about making movies during the 1920s.
Oh, hello there! Maybe I'll juggle or maybe I'll juice. Be a Top Gun and be friends with Goose.
If you're somebody who hasn't been living under a rock for the past year, there's a pretty good chance you've heard of this little film called Top Gun Maverick. This one took the world by storm, breaking box office records left and right and becoming one of the most critically acclaimed blockbusters of the past decade. I didn't even intend on watching this movie at first because I've never seen the original Top Gun, but with a movie with a reputation like this, it's hard to shove aside. And I'm so glad I watched it because it is astoundingly great. Honestly, it's remarkable that this movie turned out so amazing. In an age where the biggest movies focus on being as grand and epic as possible, it's refreshing to get a blockbuster like this one. It isn't all about having world-ending stakes like so many other films nowadays are. Instead, it takes its time to tell an emotionally rich and slower-paced story that's still able to have stakes. I love how most of this movie focuses on the training leading up to the mission rather than the actual mission itself. Because of that, we get to spend time just hanging out with these characters and getting to know them. It's the perfect blend of being a modern blockbuster and just being a really fun movie to vibe to. I was able to get invested in these characters and what they go through while also sitting back to eat popcorn and watch some cool planes fly around. Not only does the movie succeed at that, but it's a great example of how to do a legacy sequel the correct way. Like I said, I haven't seen the first film, but this movie does a fantastic job establishing who these characters are in a way that feels natural. It's able to satisfy longtime fans of the original while also standing up super well on its own 2 feet. The overall filmmaking is also something the movie gets right, as it is a sequel coming out 36 years after its predecessor. It doesn't feel like it's trying too hard to bring this property into the modern times to fit with other movies. Yeah, the production values and effects have undeniably been amped up, but the story still feels like it could have come from the 80s, while also not trying too hard to pander to the audience that grew up with that era of films. This movie clearly knows what it's trying to be, and it doesn't do that in a way that's obnoxious. It's all just so fun, so cool, so exciting, so well made, so well written. Both Pete and Rooster were characters I got so wrapped up in, and I loved seeing their connection grow throughout the film. When the two finally have to work together to get back safely in the climax, it's really satisfying to see. And once again, I haven't even seen the original, so the fact that this film was able to get me invested in these characters despite not being all that familiar with their backstories really says something about how great of a sequel it is. The third act itself has a few structure problems, and the Lady Gaga song in the credits was not one I was vibing to. Otherwise though, this is an absolute triumph of a film that's worthy of every ounce of praise it's received and every dollar of its box office. I would not be surprised if it goes down in history alongside Toy Story 2 and The Empire Strikes Back as one of the greatest sequels ever made. This is an all-around magnificent movie that I could praise all day long. But not today. There are still 4 movies left to discuss. The top tier movies, the ones that I awarded with a 10 out of 10. That's twice as many as I gave out in the 2021 list, so it really goes to show how incredible this year was. Now it's time to end things off with the 4 movies that I consider to be masterpieces.
Autumn, year 31 of the Pompo.
Ever since I first heard about Pompo the Cinephile, I had a gut feeling that I would love it. But even with that expectation in place, this film absolutely blew me away. I never would have thought that it would be this phenomenal, but I'm so happy it turned out this way. This is a film that's about filmmaking, so of course it's something that would be up my alley. But this movie does so much more to make for an experience that will leave a gigantic impression on any aspiring artists who go and watch it. All the characters in this movie feel layered because they have something that's driving them through the obstacles that stand in their way. That sounds generic, but the way it's executed feels so genuine and filled with heart. On their own, these characters are all immensely compelling, but watching them come together to make a movie, that right there is simply magical. It was amazing to see the abilities of these characters shine through and mesh into a film that reflects their passions onto the world. It got me invested in both this movie and the movie they were making. And even when the movie is just focusing on one character, it's able to maintain that sense of magic and hit just as hard. Natalie's struggle to become an actress is one that I got really wrapped up in. Alan's desire to help fund the movie despite the circumstances is surprisingly interesting. And best of all, Gene being in the director's chair for the first time in his life and trying to create a film that showcases all of his artistic visions despite the problems that come up during the production. By some miracle, the movie manages to maintain a clear sense of focus despite having multiple characters it wants to focus on. Not only is Gene made out to be the central character who gets the most screen time, but all of this stuff revolves around a theme about understanding yourself and how you're able to add something into the world. In fact, this especially hits hard with Gene, who is a character I really saw myself in. I felt his struggle of being a director. I cared immensely about him wanting to make the movie be his movie. I was rooting for him to successfully edit the film and have his inspiration make it into the final product. The dude spends hours for days on end trying to edit this thing. Hahaha, I sure can relate to that. Please like the video, I'm so tired. It'd already be a fantastic film with just this compelling story and these messages, but the way it's presented just drives home the themes of the movie even further. Every scene just pops out, and the passion of the writers and directors can clearly be seen without feeling on the nose. The entire thing is filled with so much energy, from the animation to the music to Pompo herself just being a delight of a character. It all just works so well and creates something really special. I can admit it may have some structure problems, but none of that matters to me at all because of the absolute wonder this movie showcases on screen. I would highly recommend this film to anybody who's passionate about the medium of film, and while I'm at it, I also want to recommend my friend Jacob's video on the movie. He did a great job going over the themes of the film and how well they work. That fully makes up for his not-so-great ratings of other 2022 anime movies such as Goodbye Donglese, Inu-Oh, and Chicken Head. Pompo the Cinephile is such a great movie, and I hope it gets more attention because it deserves it. This is a banger, and I'm more than excited to see Gene Feeney's next film.
You know what you need? You need an upbeat, inspirational song about life.
Everything Everywhere All at Once is truly a film like none other. I really cannot name another movie like this one. It's such a unique experience. I'm sure you've all heard about this movie, it's impossible to avoid it. But all the amazing things that have been said about this film, they are true. I cannot believe how spectacular it is because on paper, it straight up shouldn't work. A film about a mother trying to reconcile with her daughter has a plot where she also has to save the multiverse and become some super invincible hero by doing random shenanigans. This sounds like trash, but the execution is just mwah. All of these ideas, some of which are nonsensical, come together in a way that fits. Anything that feels weird or out of place, the movie quickly blends it in to the point where it makes sense to the audience. None of it is confusing, it all feels developed and well thought out despite how insane it actually is. Honestly, this might be the most creative use of the multiverse that I have ever seen. And that's saying something because movies and TV shows have constantly taken swings at this concept, but none of them have used it to the amazing degree that this movie does. People having to do weird things to activate the abilities of their alternate dimension selves is, well, weird, but the movie still reels it in to the point where it can be taken seriously. And that's another thing. This movie is able to simultaneously be one of the most bizarre and strange pieces of film I've ever witnessed, while also managing to expertly tell a story that conveys themes of parenthood, generational trauma, and the importance of empathy. The fact that it blends these two things together in a way that feels seamless just astounds me. It never feels like the movie has tonal issues or it's taking things too seriously. It knows what emotion to convey at what time, resulting in a movie that's loads of fun and thematically rich. But the mixture of all this stuff just works. It still feels like the directors are making one whole movie despite pulling off multiple things at once. It's the perfect amalgamation of a deep art house movie and just a dumb fun film. It's possibly one of the most complex films of the entire year while also being one of the most comedic films of the entire year. It still takes advantage of the weird stuff that's happening on screen, and it's hilarious. The cast works so well for this story, and they make any situation that comes up either feel more fun or more serious and emotional. The themes are conveyed in such a way that bakes itself into the multiverse story. Every scene matters, every scene feels like it's adding something to the themes of the movie. Even the stupid ones like Hot Dog Fingerland, it doesn't feel like filler. It's all there to serve as pieces for Evelyn to realize that there is value in every life. There's a reason to live, and there's always happiness to be found. No matter how weird the world may seem, no matter how other people may act, no matter what you spend your life doing, there is always a reason that you're there. And then after Evelyn comes to that realization, the climax isn't her taking down a villain or something like that. Instead, it's her spreading joy to those around her and trying to make the most of the life she was given. And that extends to her conversation with Joy at the end, where Evelyn tells her that despite all the things that annoy her and them drifting apart, there's a reason they were put on the earth together. They've been through so many bad experiences, but they're still together and they wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And then we get to see that same happiness being found with Evelyn within every other universe, all with the beautiful score and that one powerful hug between her and her daughter. Holy crap, this movie is art. Every time I think back to it, I just find something new to love. It has so much creativity, heart, and impactful moments layered on top of a movie that's just fun. If I wanted to, I could sing this movie's praises for ages. The only real nitpick I would have is that the first act, while still fantastic, does feel a bit slow compared to the other two. Otherwise, this is one of the best movies of the century. You've all seen how much praise it's gotten, and the movie warrants all of it. It's outstanding, it's incredible, it's an absolute sensation, it's everything everywhere all at once. Much like I discussed in my Mamoru Hosoda video, there simply are not enough positive words in the dictionary to describe how much I love Belle. This is one of the most stunning and beautiful movies, not just in terms of movies this year, but animated movies in general. And when I say beautiful, I mean from a visual standpoint and a story standpoint. The animation itself is some of the most gorgeous I've seen, but the writing also hits so hard on so many levels. Suzu is a character that I honestly saw a lot of myself in, and what she goes through in this movie is so compelling that it got me emotionally invested from beginning beginning to end. Her relationships with the people around her just add to how wrapped up I got in her character. The journey she goes through from not valuing herself and keeping her emotions locked up to spreading love and positivity in order to help people is gorgeous. And that's not even scratching the surface with how phenomenal this movie is. Like I said, the visuals are amazing. The soundtrack is one of my favorites in any film, period. The characters outside of Suzu are all likable and interesting. The film is filled with so many staggering sequences that take my breath away even after watching them for the 10th time. The Lend Me Your Voice scene is sensational, and man, a million miles away, I still cannot express how magnificent it is. This 9-minute sequence packs such a strong emotional punch that most movies can't even dream of being this powerful. In fact, the last act in general is all just incredibly done, really moving stuff. This movie is unbelievably fantastic, and it's kind of a miracle how well it works. In an era of remakes that miss the point of the original and movies that don't use the internet in a logical or smart way, Belle is a perfect example of how to do both of those things correctly. I still think this is Mamoru Hosoda's best film, as well as his magnum opus. Dare I say it, this is his Spirited Away. The film that combines everything that worked about his previous ones, resulting in something truly spectacular. You all know how much I adore this movie. I've talked about it in the past, and I can't wait to talk about it more in the future. Belle is a true wonder of a film, and one that I will forever love. But there's one movie that I found myself loving even more. And once you see what that film is, you're all probably going to laugh. In the 2021 list, I said that I had a tough time choosing between the top 2 movies for which one should get the top spot. And for the longest time, this list was the same. Belle and Everything Everywhere were the ones that were battling it out for the number 1 spot, and given how good those films are, it'd be near impossible for anything else to come in and compete with them. But then, after doing a whole lot of thinking, I just accepted it. I accepted that I love the Bob's Burgers movie. Nearly everything about this film is something that I was able to vibe to and get behind, but it still seems so bizarre that I love it to the extent that I do. Compare this to my favorite movie of any year prior to this one, and it simply doesn't fit. Most of the time, the movie that ends up being my favorite is the one that has an immense emotional impact on me or brings out a unique experience that can't be matched. Heck, those descriptions perfectly fit the 2 movies I just talked about, and yet I still chose the silly burger movie for the top spot of the list. Why is that? Well, while I can fully admit that Belle and Everything Everywhere are better movies than this, the Bob's Burgers movie is just the one that I love the most. To quote Variety's review of this movie, it's like a fizzy soda on a hot day. Not necessarily something that will change your life, but still a tremendously pleasant and enjoyable experience. It's no wonder why I went on to rewatch this movie so many times. The Bob's Burgers movie is a hilarious delight. It makes me laugh again and again, even after multiple viewings. These characters are just so fun to watch and be around. The animation is appealingly crisp and smooth. The musical numbers are filled with so much joy and love. You want to know what my favorite movie scene of this year was? It's Sunny Side Up Summer, the opener of this movie. The song on its own is wonderful, but seeing these characters sing it as a way of introducing the audience to the movie they're about to watch just makes it 100 times better. Every time I've sat down to watch this movie and the beautiful melody of the song comes on as the kids leave for school and Bob starts cooking, I get a special feeling. A feeling that I'm not just watching a mindlessly fun movie, I'm watching something magical. Seeing these characters on the big screen bringing the same life and charm into this movie that they did into the series, that was amazing. And every single episode of the show that I've watched since then has only made me appreciate this factor even more. Again, this is not an objectively perfect movie, but it is the perfect Bob's Burgers movie. It never loses sight of what it is, and what it is a funny, joyous, charming film based on a show about a family who owns a burger restaurant. While it's technically not doing as much for the audience, I can't even bring myself to care because I'm too busy laughing, smiling, tapping my feet to the songs, feeling excitement in the third act, and being endeared by this movie's cast. I am so happy this movie is like this, and I wouldn't want it any other way. I really do love nearly everything about it, and even the stuff that I don't doesn't bother me in the slightest. It's not an emotionally stirring movie that will change your outlook on life forever, much like, say, Belle, Violet Evergarden the movie, Everything Everywhere, Luca, Little Fish, etc. It may not be any of those things, but what it is the Bob's Burgers movie. I adore what it is, and I don't think I ever won't. To everybody who worked on this film, thank you so much. Thank you for keeping what makes Bob's Burgers work and packing it all into one incredible movie. A funny movie, an enjoyable movie, a delightful movie, a movie that is everything I could possibly want out of a Bob's Burgers movie. While Belle and Everything Everywhere are still technically superior movies, they cannot compete with how much I love this one. Which is exactly why the Bob's Burgers movie earns the title of being my favorite movie of 2022.
Something extra before the end.
Marmaduke is awesome!